Greetings, everybody. Can you hear me? At this time, we will call to order the 198th meeting of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation. Today is, the time is 10:34. Today is Wednesday, March 12th. We are in person in the New York State Museum Huxley Auditorium. The meeting is also being transmitted via WebEx for remote attendees, although in-person attendance is required for quorum. At this time, I will ask Kathy to call the roll, and as people are called, I would ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role on the State Review Board.
Good morning, everyone. Wynne Aldridge.
Wynne Aldridge, former Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation at State Parks, and I represent a history seat on the board.
Carol Clark, an adjunct professor of historic preservation at Columbia University, Pratt Institute, and NYU, and a former deputy commissioner at State Parks.
Jay DiLorenzo. Absent. Molly Garfinkel.
Hi, good morning. I'm Molly Garfinkel. I am here as the co-director of City Lore and the director of City Lore's Place Matters program, and I am an architectural historian and a public historian.
Wayne Goodman.
Hi, Wayne Goodman, Executive Director for the Landmark Society of Western New York in Rochester.
Kristen Herron.
I'm Kristen Herron, Program Director for Design Arts and Museums, representing the New York State Council on the Arts.
Erica Krieger.
Good morning. I'm Erica Krieger. I'm an architect. I'm the Assistant Director for the Variance Unit at the Department of State, and I'm here representing the Secretary.
Jennifer Lemack.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Lemack, the Chief Curator of History here at the New York State Museum, and I represent the Commissioner of Education on the board.
Welcome to our newest board member from State Council on Parks, Heather Mabey.
Heather Mabey. I am the chair of the Saratoga Capital District Region Commission for State Parks and Historic Preservation, and I'm here representing Brian Earn from the State Council of Parks.
Welcome. Douglas Pirelli.
I am the chair of this State Review Board. I am a teaching professor in the anthropology department of the University of Buffalo, past president of the New York Archaeological Council, and I serve as one of the archaeology members of the State Review Board.
Peter Rubin.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Rubin. I'm the director of the Office of Indian Nation Affairs for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'm here on behalf of the commissioner.
Thank you. And Gretchen Soren. I know she's on her way looking for a parking spot, so she should be joining us shortly. Thank you.
Next agenda item is the approval of the December 24 State Review Board minutes. Do any board members have any corrections or questions about the December minutes? If there are none, I would ask for a motion to approve.
So move. Erica.
Erica Krieger moves. Do I have a second?
Wayne, second.
Wayne beat you to it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Unanimous. All right, we'll move on to the New York State Unmarked Burial Site Protection Act and updates to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act.
I just want to first welcome Gretchen. I know you've been.
Well, this will be my last meeting if we continue to have it here because this is ridiculous. I'm not
The
kidding.
parking situation's terrible. The fact that
It's
we can't park in that
ridiculous.
lot right there is very frustrating.
All the visitor parking is full. And I am,
And there's no,
I've had it.
no street parking
No.
today.
I've got 2 hours. I'll be here for 2 hours. And I'm leaving.
Present, thank you. Okay, moving on to the presentation next.
I've had it.
All right, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep.
My name is Jessica Schreier, and I'm the Archaeology Unit Coordinator at Parks. Today, I'll be talking about the Unmarked Burial Site Protection Act, which is also called McKinney's Executive Law. Jessica Vavrasek is the NAG project coordinator at Parks, and she'll be presenting information on the new duty of care updates for the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. The New York State Unmarked Burial Site Protection Act became effective on August 1st, 2023. This law lays out a process for the discovery and disposition of human remains and funerary objects. All of the information I present today is summarized on the fact sheet poster, which is underneath your other papers. The new law protects all unmarked burial sites in New York State. It provides a process to follow if unmarked graves are discovered. The law creates a Native American Burial Site Review Committee to make decisions about indigenous burial sites. It also provides a somewhat separate process for determining disposition of non-indigenous burials. The law includes criminal penalties for intentionally disturbing or removing human remains and funerary objects from unmarked burial sites. The burial law should always be followed for incidental finds of human remains. For example, if human remains were found in the woods by a hunter or a hiker. The process laid out by the burial law does not apply to projects reviewed under federal and state historic preservation regulations. Specifically, the law does not apply for projects reviewed under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. That is, when a project is receiving federal permitting or funding. It also does not apply for projects reviewed under Section 1409 of the Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation Law. That is, when a project is receiving state permitting or funding. The law does apply to certain projects that are reviewed under the State Environmental Quality Review Act and the City Environmental Quality Review Act. The one exception is that the criminal penalties still apply for disturbing or removing human remains on projects reviewed under Section 106 and Section 1409. The Burial Protection Law requires the formation of a Native American Burial Sites Review Committee. The review committee consists of one member from each of the Native American nations recognized by the state archaeologist at the New York State Museum, a forensic anthropologist or bioarchaeologist at the New York State Museum, a New York Archaeological Council representative, and a representative from the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and that's me. So how do you know if you have encountered a human burial site? The most obvious evidence indicating the presence of a burial site is human skeleton or other remains. If human skeleton or other remains are found, or if bones are found and you are not sure that it is human, it is important that you secure the site and do not take or allow photographs unless they are requested for official or forensic use. Sometimes you can detect the presence of a human burial by identifying grave shafts in the soil. In the photo on the left, the yellow arrows indicate two grave shafts that are visible in the wall of the excavation. There are other grave shafts in this photo, but these two really stand out in this photograph. The photo on the right shows the outline of a coffin. Grave shafts can be smaller or larger than this and can take different shapes depending on whether a burial is laid out or flat or flexed. Discoveries of coffin hardware may indicate the presence of a human burial. Coffin hardware often consists of decorative or plain metal items such as handles, screws, nails, studs, and coffin plates. I will also note that indigenous burials may contain funerary objects, and those objects are protected by this law as well. So what should you do if you find human remains or evidence of a human burial? If human remains are found that are not associated with a Section 1409 or Section 106 project, the new burial law must be followed. You should immediately stop all activity and call 911. The coroner or medical examiner will determine the nature of the remains. The coroner or medical examiner will notify the state archaeologist if the remains are more than 50 years old. The state archaeologist's phone number and web address for burial law information are listed on this slide and are also on the fact sheet poster. The state archaeologist will evaluate the discovery and issue a report to the committee and property owner within 10 days. If multiple burials are discovered, the amount of time can be extended. So what should you do if human remains are found during construction or archaeological investigations that are associated with a 1409 or Section 106 project? You should stop all activity and secure the location. You should immediately call law enforcement, the State Historic Preservation Office, and involve state and federal agencies. The State Historic Preservation Office or the involved state and federal agency will immediately notify the appropriate indigenous nations. If the human remains are determined to be Native American, they should be left in place and protected from further disturbance until a plan for their avoidance or removal is developed. The involved agency will consult with the the involved agency will consult with the State Historic Preservation Office and the appropriate indigenous nations to develop a plan of action. If the human remains are discovered to be non-Native American, the remains should be left in place and protected from further disturbance until a plan for their avoidance or removal is developed. The involved agency will consult with the State Historic Preservation Office and other appropriate parties to develop a plan of action. Please note that avoidance and leaving burials in place is the preferred option of the State Historic Preservation Office and the indigenous nations. So this is a little bit hard to see, but this is a form created by the state archaeologist to assist coroners or medical examiners or others in reporting an unmarked burial. The form is available on the state archaeologist's unmarked burial law page on the New York State Museum's website. If you need to report an unmarked human burial, a phone call is strongly preferred, and that's for timeliness. Emailing this form is an option, but it isn't preferred since emailing is a slower method of communication. I'm including this form here because it's a handy tool for gathering information. If you were to discover a burial and you were waiting for law enforcement or wanted to jot down notes, the fields on this form can be a guide for the important information to collect. It asks for your name, phone number, and email address, the date the burial was found, the address of where it was found, whether it's private or public land. The location of the burial on the property and GPS coordinates would be very helpful in this situation, especially away from roads. The manner in which it was found, for example, was it found during excavations or plowing, or was it a surface find? The depth at which the burial was found, what was found, was law enforcement notified, and you can note your law enforcement contact. Okay, so what happens after you report the burial? There are different protocols for indigenous burials and non-indigenous burials. If the burial site is Native American, within 10 days, the committee will have stewardship of the human remains and funerary objects and will notify lineal descendants or culturally affiliated groups. Within 60 days, lineal descendants or culturally affiliated groups will advise the committee in writing of the preferred disposition. The committee will consult with the property owner to facilitate the preferred disposition. If there is agreement about disposition, a plan will be developed for protection of the burial site or removal of the remains. If there is no agreement and the property owner prefers removal, the committee will establish a plan for removal. If no action has occurred within 90 days, the property owner may hire an archaeologist or a bioarchaeologist to remove the remains. The removal may be monitored by the culturally affiliated groups. If the burial site is not Native American, as soon as practicable, the state archaeologist will attempt to identify lineal descendants or culturally affiliated groups and provide notification. Within 10 days, lineal descendants or culturally affiliated groups will advise the state archaeologist of the preferred disposition, which may include protection of the burial site. The state archaeologist will consult the property owner to facilitate disposition. Within 10 days of the report, the property owner will notify the state archaeologist of the preferred disposition. If no action has occurred within 90 days, the property owner may hire an archaeologist or bioarchaeologist to remove the remains in a respectful manner. And these are, this is some contacts. It's myself at the top, Christina Reith at the State Museum is state archaeologist on the committee, and Lisa Anderson is the curator of bioarchaeology, and she's on the committee as well. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, in terms of the procedure for contacting the coroner or medical examiner, is this is there a statewide number to use, or is this the county by county consideration? And do you have a list of contact information for those people?
I don't have that. What we advise is that you call 911 and then law enforcement will bring in the coroner or the medical examiner. Medical examiner, sorry.
And do you have plans to share the recordation form with the board and people so we can actually use it? And can we have a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Does this include remains that are, well, not remains, but evidence that's found in documentary sources? So if you were to find a map, so maps that say slave burial ground or that have been not found before, or Native American burial ground, does that include that or no? Is it just for archaeological finds?
It's for incidental finds and archaeological finds and construction finds. So it would be, evidence of, tangible remains.
Okay.
Any other questions? Comments?
Gretchen, that information, if it comes to light, ought to be shared
Somewhere.
in confidence somewhere yeah, it shouldn't just be forgotten.
This is Nancy Herder. I also work for the State Historic Preservation.
Nancy, if you can come to the podium so we can hear what you're saying.
Have a microphone.
So again, this is Nancy Herder. I also work for the State Historic Preservation Office. So if you would like to report a cemetery or an unmarked burial ground, you could always reach out to Jesse Schreier or myself, and we're happy to record that information in our site file system. And our site file system is only accessible to certain people, so you don't have to worry about someone who's unauthorized looking at that information. So it's usually professional archaeologists, Indian nations have access, people from agencies, both state and federal, who routinely do Historic Preservation Act reviews also have access, but our site files are not open to the public. So we try to keep it confidential.
And that would be reported to me in my role at the SHPO and not the burial committee, just to. Hi.
I'm just curious, how often are sites discovered unintentionally? How frequently? And is there a part of the state where you get them mostly here and not so much over there?
Oh, not very often. Unintentionally, where someone discovers human remains where they didn't expect them to be. I'm sorry. Probably Nancy thinks probably once a year.
Okay.
And I'd agree with that.
Any other questions or comments? Great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, we'll keep it rolling with yet another Jessica for you guys. A bit easy. So like Jessica said, I'm Jessica Vavrasek. I'm the NAGPRA project coordinator for the New York Park System, and I'm here today to talk to you about NAGPRA. So what is NAGPRA besides yet another acronym that we throw around all the time? So NAGPRA is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. This act was actually established back in 1990. And when it came out, it was kind of like a new thing, like, oh, it's like we're finally taking some action. We're going to get some, justice for the Native American peoples. We're going to get some of their stuff back and everything. And so it was great. So they put it out as a federal law to help protect these things. Well, unfortunately, they kind of rushed it out the door a little bit, didn't have as much Native American input as they probably should have. And there was a few kind of loopholes, why don't we call it, that allowed some things to stay at museums or institutions that probably shouldn't have. Everybody thought that it needed to be changed, but nobody had time. Nobody had time. And then the pandemic came up, and that's all anybody had was time. because you were stuck at home just staring at a screen being like, yep, I can do my work. And they're like, hey, this is the perfect opportunity to revamp NAGPRA and get it going back in the right direction the way we wanted. So they started working on it. It was a multi-year project. And then finally in 2024, it came out as new NAGPRA. New NAGPRA is an 88-page document. We only have, about another half an hour, so I guess I better start reading fast. No, just kidding. Nobody actually needs to know everything that's in the 88 pages unless you're somebody like me who is doing NAGPRA for a living. This is what I do. So I'm just going to kind of give you a few pointers, some of the key points of NAGPRA that you guys need to know and some of the biggest changes that happened to it. So when it came out in 24, the two new things came out in it that rocked the world. Well, the world being the US. So geographic affiliation was added. Up until 24, you had to know exactly what nation group human remains belonged to, funerary objects, sacred objects. You needed to know exactly who it belonged to in order to give it back. Just knowing that it came from, Oneida County or something like that wasn't good enough. You needed to know exactly down to a site, down to a group, something like that. So those remains kind of lingered. Well, now adding geographic affiliation, as long as you know it came from something like New York State or Oneida County, that's all you need to know. And you can contact the appropriate nations that have some sort of claim to the area. Their ancestors used to be there or they're there now. You can reach out to them and be like, hey, we have stuff. We have your ancestors, funerary objects, sacred objects. Are you interested in them? And so that can actually get some of these things back that have been locked behind walls of, well, we don't need to give that back because we don't know exactly who it is. So it gives the nations more freedom to get some of their more important objects back. And the biggest thing that was added is duty of care. So what is duty of care? This is duty of care in its entirety. A little 1 paragraph, 3-point thing that was added to the 88-page document in NAGPRA. This changed everything. This is what sent the Smithsonian into a tailspin, every museum that was out there into a tailspin. Nobody knew what to do because of duty of care. So I'm going to go into this more in depth than the rest of NAGPRA because this is what is affecting everybody now. So duty of care requires a museum or federal agency. Just so you know, Parks is considered a museum, just like the New York State Museum here. Who knew? But we're a museum. Or a Department of Hawaiian Homelands to care, safeguard, preserve any human remains or cultural items in its custody, possession, or control that are subject to NAGPRA. And so if you do have one of these things, you must consult with lineal descendants. That's, pretty good. You want to actually consult to anybody who might have ties with this. And you want to kind of consult with them on, appropriate storage for these things. It's like, do they need to be in a pine box? Do they need to be in unbleached muslin or some other situation, always facing north, facing south, something like that? You can actually get a hold of them and they can give you input on what you're supposed to be doing. Treatments, do they want you to preserve it or not? And just general handling of these remains. It's like, do they want to be present or not when things are examined, moved, stored, things like that. So actually open up, great communication with the nations. And you're supposed to make a reasonable and good faith effort to incorporate and accommodate the Native American traditional knowledge of lineal descendants, Indian tribes, and Native Hawaiian organizations in the storage, treatment, and handling of these remains. So if one of them wants to have a smudging ceremony, you let them have a smudging ceremony. If they want to give it an offering of burned tobacco, you let them have their offering of burned tobacco. And so it's just bringing in their traditional knowledge, or if they tell you, oh, I know exactly what this is. I know what it was used for. My ancestor used to use this. Great. You write that down, you keep that information with it because that's something that's been passed down through their lines, their generations, and it's something that you can add to the record of that artifact or that human remain. Okay, great. And then obtain free and prior informed consent from lineal descendants, tribes, nations, before allowing any exhibit or access to or research on any of these human remains or cultural items. This is what threw everybody for a loop. Because now we used to be able to display stuff, as long as it wasn't necessarily like human remains on display, but we could display anything we wanted. When duty of care came out, this last statement, is saying that we have to talk to the nations first and get their approval before we can put anything on. Some of you might think that's a little bit overboard, but they added in this one key term, cultural items. And this is what is throwing everything for a loop. So let's do a little key terminology here to get you guys caught up on why this is so specific. So cultural items are listed as, and this is how NAGPRA lists them out, a funerary object, sacred object, or object of cultural patrimony according to Native American traditional knowledge. Okay, we just threw out a whole bunch of other terms in with this one key term. So I think we need to break these out again because cultural items seems to be a very loaded term with a whole bunch of different topics within it. So what is a funerary object? So it's an object reasonably believed to have been placed intentionally within or near human remains. A funerary object is also any object connected either at the time of death or later to death rites, which is something that a lot of people often forget. So like the feast afterwards or a mask that goes along with the death ceremony, those are also considered funerary objects. And going through, and then it's just, again, according to their traditional knowledge, if they say this is often found in, funerary object, is found in the burials, is found that, you have to take it at their word. You're like, okay, this is your traditional beliefs. This is what happened. I have to go with it. Other one, sacred object, is a specific ceremonial object needed by traditional religious leaders for presenting, for present day adherence to practice traditional knowledge, religion, and according to Native American traditions. So these are things that would go into like the ceremonies or something like that. So something that wasn't necessarily related to an actual burial, but having rising of the sun ceremony, corn ceremony, something like that. Those are the types of sacred objects. Something that in the past everybody used to call, they found something new, it's a sacred object. Not quite. The nations have their own ideas of what is actually considered sacred. And sometimes it's an eye opener to us because something as an archaeologist, we might not understand that it's considered sacred, but to one group, it could be. And so with allowing us to actually talk to them and have these discussions, we can figure that out and we can be more respectful. And then objects of cultural patrimony. This is the problem child when it comes to cultural items. So this is basically any object that has ongoing historical tradition or cultural importance. So any native member, any nation can come up to us and be like, this object right here, this is important to my tribe, my nation, my family, or whatever. And it is automatically considered under NAGPRA. That's no ifs, ands, or buts, it is. So these objects of cultural patrimony are why we can't just display things. We used to think, projectile points, arrowheads, they're hunting implements. What do they, mean? What do they do? Well, in some cases, they're actually important to a nation group, or they were buried with somebody, and if you found it, there's a chance it came from that burial. And so the nations just want a chance of looking at the stuff, looking at where it was found, so that they can make those determinations for themselves. And so that's okay, but it does mean that, a lot of places, like said, the Smithsonian had to shut down entire wings until they could actually consult with the nations and figure out what was okay and what is not to display. It also means that if you're having somebody come in and do research on Native American objects, you kind of can't until you get the nation's approval, being like, hey, this, student or researcher, whoever wants to come in and do research on something, is that allowed? Here's the collection, here's the info, and then they can say yes or no. And so it kind of bogs down all of our institutions and museums trying to get through this, but it's really a good thing when it comes to the end, because we're actually making sure that the nations are heard and understood and getting their things back and, getting things back into more working order between, us and them. And so here's my contact information. I'm a little bit hard to find. You can't find me online. Haha. Which is great. But you can have the info here, or if you forget to write it down or whatever, you can also talk to the other Jessica. We work in the same office. I can basically throw a ball and hit her in the head in her office, so we're that close. But if you have questions about NAGPRA, concerns, anything like that, feel free to contact me. I can't do a NAGPRA process for anybody other than parks, but I can totally help you. I can send you in the right direction of who to contact, forms, timeframes, things like that. I've helped other historical societies get through some of these. They're like, oh, we just found some human remains. What do we do? okay, take a breath. These are the steps. This is who you have to talk to, and get them going in the right direction. So if you are in that situation or know of somebody in that situation and they just don't know what to do, have them contact me and I'll get them in the right direction. Does anybody have any questions for me or for the other Jessica?
Does the law address the commerce in these materials, or is that a different law? I mean, I can imagine things maybe found years ago, get into private collections or offered for sale. And I can imagine tribes saying, well, wait a minute, that must have come from our part of the world. Does the law prohibit sale and require an involvement by the Native American communities?
It does not, but this has come up as a topic in a working group for Northeastern NAGPRA, and it has come up. The nations are concerned about this because things have been sold or traded in the past that probably shouldn't have, or they felt that they weren't paid enough for the time and the labor and everything that went into it by past ancestors. And so they're like, you might have bought that item, but we don't think you bought it fairly. And it's definitely one of the categories of things that we don't think should ever leave outside of our nation group. And so they will ask for those back. You don't have to, but people are finding it that it's really a good idea. Like if it's something that you can actually, kind of like work through the NAGPRA process unofficially and get that stuff back to them, it's just a good idea to do so. But as far as under the law, no, you don't have to.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on Wynn's question, it's a law that has teeth for federal jurisdictions and not private owners.
I see, yeah.
So I have a question. How does this information get out to the general contractor out there who lives in a little tiny town, is digging up a site, comes upon some remains, doesn't, calls his local coroner who tells, who comes in and does that? How does he know to get the information to you? Just out of curiosity.
So information that comes to me is only from stuff that's found on state parklands. Okay. Those are what I deal with. Lisa Anderson, who Jessica already mentioned, is also the NAGPRA project coordinator for the museum. And often people will kind of contact her and give her a heads up. Jesse, did you?
Is your question regarding how a contractor on a project knows about what happens during the long term?
So we're trying to get the information out. Some members of the burial committee are meeting with an association of coroners, I think this month.
Okay.
Most people would call the police when they find human remains because they think that there's a possibility that they're recent, and it's kind of a shocking find. So I think most people would call police first, and then the police would decide to bring in the other parties. But yeah, it is just, to inform people that may be digging. I don't know how would we get that information out, but we're thinking about that on the committee and how to disseminate the information out.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that was great. Very informative. Moving on to our next agenda item, the National Register nomination reviews. Chelsea.
Sorry, it's a long way back there. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Huxley Theater at the New York State Museum in Albany. We welcome our nomination sponsors, consultants, and property owners who have worked very hard alongside our National Register staff to prepare the nominations you will see today. A special thank you goes to Erin Cernecki, who prepared the presentation slides. For the first time in a long time, I don't have any new staff to introduce to you, but our newest staff members, both Jonathan Ferris and Julie Maresco, will have their first presentations today. So we welcome them to our presenting group. Today you will hear about 21 nominations that come from 14 different counties across the state. With these nominations, we recognize historic significance in a wide range of areas, including architecture, Jewish heritage, entertainment and recreation, social history, commerce, performing arts, and many others. Of these 21 nominations, 13 are honorary designations and 9 are for the purposes of commercial tax credits. Board members, please note that the St. Stephen's Roman Catholic Church complex, which you would have read, will not be presented at today's meeting due to complications with the notification process, but we hope to present that nomination at a future meeting. For our guests who are joining us remotely and who have a special interest in the nominations presented here today, you are welcome to offer comment following the presentation of your nomination. Each virtual attendee should have the ability to unmute yourself when it is your turn to speak. With that being said, we have a very packed agenda, so we'll start with our first presentation from New York City, presented by Kathy Howe.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Okay, I'm thrilled to be presenting this one today. This is the Marcus Garvey Park, which was, can you hear me okay? Originally known as Mount Morris Park. It is a 20-acre oasis in the heart of Harlem. The park is locally significant under Criterion A in the areas of social history, Black ethnic heritage, and performing arts. For the park's associations with civil rights, music, community organizing during the 20th century. And perhaps most significantly, it was the location of the Harlem Cultural Festival, a concert series, the most successful of which took place in the summer of 1969 and referred to afterwards as Harlem's Black Woodstock. Hopefully some of you got the opportunity, if you have Hulu, to watch Questlove's 2021 Summer of Soul documentary, where there was amazing footage from the festival. The park is also significant in the areas of community development, planning, and recreation. It is one of the earliest pieces of land in the city set aside as a public park, and the park was created in 1836, predating Central Park by over 2 decades. And finally, the park is significant under Criterion C in the area of landscape design, architecture. It is a largely intact example of WPA era park design. The period of significance, 1836, when it was established, and goes up through 1973, when the park was renamed from Mount Morris Park to the current name, Marcus Garvey Park, after the Black nationalist leader. Okay. So to orient you, if you have not been there, the park is just a block south of the very busy 125th Street in Harlem. It lies at the historical boundary between predominantly African-American Central Harlem and Spanish East Harlem. And it's really most defining geographic feature would be the 70-foot tall Mount of Manhattan schist, formed 450 million years ago. It makes up about 1/3 of the park's area, right sort of in the center part of the park. And of course, to the west of the park, adjacent to the park, is the Mount Morris Park Historic District, which is on the National Register. So the park is really a fascinating mix of cultural landscapes. And I want to point out that the photo on the right is the up on the top in the center of the park there is the Harlem Fire Watchtower. This was erected in 1856, and it is the only surviving fire tower in all of New York City. This was previously listed on the National Register, just the footprint of that structure. So that orients you. Let's take a little look at the evolution of the park through the years, studying some of the early maps. So the map on the left from 1836, the same year in which the park was established. It's very striking in how it shows the topography, dotted by old farms. We have a trotting course for horses, a little bit in the northern part there. And it's really at this period that people with money are starting to move up from maybe lower Manhattan when things are pretty crowded and establish their suburban retreats up in Harlem. And on the right, we see the 1867 map. And at that point, the park was known as Mount Morris Square. And you can see a single path running through it, some scattered structures, but not a lot to see there. But jumping forward on the 1871 plan here, Ignaz Anton Pilat designed the first landscape architecture for the park in 1871. And you can see it was very much designed in the picturesque tradition. The aerial photo on the right, which was actually taken in the 1930s, just before the park was redesigned with WPA funds. But we can see from this park that the pleasure grounds from the 1870s, by the 1930s, they're still largely intact in that plan. But all of that got erased, got redesigned in the late 1930s under City Parks Commissioner Robert Moses. So jumping forward, 1836, we have the park plan on the left. WPA, we have the prominent design consultants working for city parks at that time, Gilmore Clark and Amar Embry II, really showing more of an emphasis here on symmetry and hierarchy, and a more neo-Renaissance plan, notable arrangement of ovals on both sides, stone walls. We have a massive central terrace. And here, this is kind of a cool picture on the right from 1937. They're sort of right in the middle of redesigning the park. So you can see on the east side of the park, the right-hand side with the ovals, it's all pretty much done. They still haven't gotten quite to the west side of the park on the left. And I like to show this view. This is a wonderful view. It's actually a 1970 Hare photograph, which I just think is great because it really shows you the park's craggy landscape. We're looking at that central feature of what became known as the Acropolis and the fire tower. We see the Manhattan schist. We see the beautiful WPA design stone walls here, amazing perspectives around you of Harlem. And just to give you some current day views of the park, we can see on the left the oval playground with its basketball courts. In the southeast section of the park, we see the ever dominant Manhattan schist in the upper right, and then the connection into the adjacent neighborhood, the Mount Morris Park Historic District in the lower right. Some more views, current day views showing the beautiful stone steps. You could get a very good workout if you go to this park, climbing up to the top of the Acropolis. And really much of the WPA plan does survive today, except for some changes, which I'll talk about in a second, in the late 1960s in the western part of the park. So that's a bit about the design and the evolution. Now, the work done under the Moses administration, as we can see, was quite impressive in its scope and design, but it was not without its critics at the time. It kind of laid bare the changing demographics occurring in the neighborhood and the racial tensions that came out. And here we have Moses writing a letter to a friend saying, quote, the park was a tremendous, quote, racial problem. It was a challenge to city parks planning efforts. You had largely white residents living perhaps on the west side of the park. And they said that they, in writing a letter to city parks, that they represented, quote, old New York. And they did not welcome the changes that were proposed in the 1930s to the park. They argued that, that it would invite Black and brown children from Northwest and East Harlem into the park by having this active recreational design. And so to appease some of the white residents making a lot of noise at the time, the designers at the time ended up citing most of those recreational facilities on the east side of the park and avoiding the west side at that time. So by 1950, the residents in the immediate community of Mount Morris Park were largely Black, most migrating up from the southern states. And during this era, Harlem had suffered from disinvestment, dwindling economic opportunities, and crime. It was taking a severe toll on the quality of life in Harlem. And these economic and social stressors of the time also impacted the park. And it was under this lens that the story, the real important story of community organizing and planning comes to the fore. The Black community began to organize to bring the park back from several years of neglect by the city parks department. So they stepped forward. There was a letter written from a block association in which they wrote to city parks saying, quote, unfortunately, the park, this is 1961, this letter, the park is being used mainly by an assortment of thugs, perverts, and alcoholics. And the Block Association asked that city parks and the police department step in to clean up the unlawful behavior in the park. And so this letter kicked off a years-long effort to bring a focus and improve the park in terms of maintenance, security, recreational facilities. So in the absence at the time of government action, a coalition of groups came together to form the Mount Morris Park Rehabilitation Committee. We can see them here on the left with Assemblyman Rossetti. This is a view in 1962. And on the right, we can see a town hall meeting, a flyer that was passed around, quote, do not let cities neglect, destroy your park. And so the Rehabilitation Committee was led by Hilda Stokely, shown on the lower left here with her children. And she was, in 1962, she was the first elected female district leader of East Harlem's 68th Assembly District, serving closely with then State Assemblyman Rossetti, we saw in the previous picture. And the committee mobilized. They came out, they documented the deteriorated and unsafe conditions of the park. They took photographs, they pushed for improvements and for funding. And in 1963, major newspapers started to take note and report out on this, which really helped to force a response from City Parks Department on all of this. And, you know, Hilda Stokely, she was a mover and shaker, and she stressed the need to rehab this park because people in the community, quote, cannot afford to travel far to seek out recreational outlets elsewhere. Again, Hilda was amazing and her committee was amazing, and that she got together with planning professionals to aid in their cause, both in terms of conceptual planning, press coverage, et cetera. She worked with Arthur Rosenblatt here on the lower right, an architect who actually pro bono provided plans to help communicate to city parks the committee's ideas for the park. Their vision. And also on the left here, the woman Eleanor Guggenheimer, she was the first female member of City Parks, City Planning Commission. So she was also helping the committee out as they fought for improvements. So the committee's first big success came when the Parks Department constructed an interconnected recreation center and amphitheater complex on the west side of the park. This you can see here and here. And this was aided by a very generous donation from Broadway composer Richard Rogers, who had grown up in the neighborhood. So we've got a current view, again, showing with the blue roofs, the steeply pitched roofs, that is the rec center, and then the amphitheater to the foreground. The new rec center was featured in Progressive Architecture in 1972, and this rec center featured both an area where youth could go, senior citizens who lived in the neighborhood. There was a NYCHA complex which Kath will talk about in a second, for sports programs, social programs, etc. And the architects took advantage of the natural terrain by siting the theater seating right into the hillside. It worked quite nicely there. And this venue has hosted all kinds of music, theater, dance, cultural events since it was completed in 1970. The committee also fought very hard for a pool, which they said was, quote, a basic human necessity. So in 1971, the park received an Olympic-sized pool and bathhouse. And this facility was designed by the New York City architecture firm of Eiffel Johnson Hanchard. This was the first Parks Department project in the city's history to be designed by a Black architecture firm. This firm also designed the much more controversial state office building on 125th Street around the same time. A lot of controversy over that. Here we have some views of the pool facility. It was designed in the brutalist style, wonderful sort of curving edges to it. And in an oral history that was done as part of our nomination project, architect George Hanchard said that there was a desire for, quote, the kids of Harlem to have the same advantages as any other white child with the possibility of competing in the Olympics. And here's some current day views of that facility. The park has always been a community gathering place, whether it's for recreation, socializing, entertainment, performing arts, from parades, stage performances, political rallies. It's all in the nomination. The park has hosted an array of occasions. And starting in the late 1960s, we look at the upper right here, we have a view of the Last Poets in May 1968. This group gave a spoken word performance with kind of a percussive beat behind them. And their poetry, very revolutionary, spoken poems over this beat was considered the precursor of hip hop. So they had a performance in the park and many other performances as well. But moving on. Perhaps the most iconic cultural event to take place in the park was the Harlem Cultural Festival of summer of 1969. And the festival was held on a stage, a temporary stage, north end of the park. It showcased all kinds of music, gospel, soul, blues, jazz, funk, Latin, Afrocentric, while also serving as a platform for public figures who were engaged in pressing racial and economic challenges of the day. It was organized by Tony Lawrence, a promoter, and we had an expanded city parks department, cultural affairs department, very strong support from Mayor Lindsay. He attended the event. If you watch, you probably saw, if you watched the documentary, you saw him in that. And the event was held over 6 summer weekends. It was sponsored by Maxwell House Coffee, I think. And so they had a corporate sponsor, attracted over 300,000 people. A very impressive lineup. We can see some of the stars here: Mahalia Jackson, Nina Simone, The Fifth Dimension, Stevie Wonder, the Staple Singers, Motown artists, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Sly and the Family Stone, B.B. King, etc. The Chamber Brothers, Edmund Hawkins singers. And of course, there were moments during the festival when civil rights and systemic injustices were addressed, whether head-on or more indirectly. Lower right, we see Jesse Jackson, who at the time was head of Operation Breadbasket. He was one of the speakers. And later, talking about the festival, he said, quote, "The festival was a way to offset the pain we all felt." This was after the assassination, 1 year later, of MLK. The artists tried to express the tensions of the time, a fierce pain and a fierce joy. So while you had activist speakers, I feel it was really in the music where you found the messages related to the Black freedom struggle. Just quoting a few of the songs here: B.B. King's "Why I Sing the Blues," Max Roach and Abby Lincoln's "Africa," and the Staple Singers' "It's Been a Change." So the park, as I said, was renamed in 1973 after Marcus Garvey, and I feel that's part of the sort of important recognition of Black heritage, pride in Harlem. And with that, I do want to let you know this nomination was funded by an underrepresented communities grant. We applied for this grant. We got it a few years ago from the National Park Service. The URC grant program works towards diversifying listings submitted to the National Register. And URC grants are funded by the Historic Preservation Fund. And we have received them in the past, as you well know, casitas. Many of the nominations Kath has presented with the New York City LGBT History Project. So the project this project was so special in that it resulted not only in this nomination, but also several oral histories were done, as well as, and I shared it with the group here, an interactive ArcGIS story map called Park Power. I want to thank and I want to introduce the consultants of this project. We hired consultants Neil Larson and Associates, and specifically, you need to stand up, Marissa Mervelli, who is the lead researcher and author and just did an amazing job going above and beyond. Also, Jenna Dublin-Bach, who did the oral histories and did the story map. And of course, Neil Larson. Thank you, Kath, for editing it. And a big thank you, and some of them are on the call today. Another important part of this is we didn't just go into this blind, as people in Albany, doing this nomination. We work with the community. That was the single most important thing. We had an advisory committee from the get-go and worked with city park staff. So these are the various groups here represented. So a shout out to Mount Morris Park Community Improvement Association, especially Madeline Stokely, Hilda's daughter, Marcus Garvey Park Alliance, Save Harlem Now. Thank you, Valerie Jo Bradley, Claudette Brady, City Park staff, Depeche Noreen, Sybil Young, others, and community boards 10 and 11. We have 2 letters of support from New York City LP Landmarks Preservation Commission and from the Mount Morris Park Community Improvement Association. And that is Marcus Garvey Park. Questions? We also have people on the line. I don't know if anybody wants to speak today or if there's questions that I cannot answer. Luckily, Marissa's here. So thank you. Questions?
Do we think there's anybody remotely that wants to say a word?
This is Madeline Stokely. I would like to speak.
Okay, Madeline Stokely, who is Hilda Stokely's daughter. The floor is yours, Madeline.
Boy, I'm so emotional. I didn't know I would feel so emotional about this. So first of all, let me thank you for even getting this to this point, for acknowledging the importance of that park to the community and the coordination, struggle, and fights and successes that a community had, particularly at a time where the Black voice in New York City was so suppressed. So having this acknowledged and having it listed in the registry, if that is your will be so significant to the Harlem community. We who are working now in community organizing often refer back to the women and men who worked before us to get us to this point. This park is critical and important to our well-being and survival. It's not just a luxury. It has been a necessity in Harlem. And I appreciate that we got to this point and hope that you will see that this is a park and a community movement that deserves recognition at this level. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful words. Anyone else wishing to speak, or Marissa? No? Okay.
Sure. This is Sandra Heath, and I just want to, of course, concur with what Madeline said. And thank you so much, Madeline, for speaking. And it's really moving to look at the progression, just to be a part of this moment in time. Really grateful to the full team. It's hard to speak. My heart is beating as I just look at what has taken place over the years. And I think also the importance of this work and this designation as we think about who will be in a conversation looking at history 300 years from now, as we look back. I think this designation would be really important to their work as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else online wishing to speak? Otherwise, we'll turn it over to the board.
Questions from the board or comments, Gretchen?
I was reading this. It was excellent. Yeah. The history was so well done, and it really presented a thorough analysis. And it was thrilling to be able to read something that was about African-American history that wasn't about the projects. Mm-hmm. So for me, this was one of the best nominations of this session, because it was just, I have to commend everybody that was involved because it was so incredibly well done, well written, and as a historian, really good history.
Nice.
Thank you.
Carol?
I simply want to echo what Gretchen said. I think this is an excellent nomination.
Molly.
Also wanted to amplify that, both statements before me, but want to just say how important I also thought the oral history component was to helping really bring the story home. Just to read the acknowledgement of finally having a place to sit while attending a concert is so it's so moving. It's really a lot to think about in terms of equity, and to say that 300 years from now this will be an important roadmap, and it is equally important in this current moment to understand and have precedent for community coalition building at the local level, making change at the local level. It's just really grateful to have this right this time.
Where will the oral histories be housed?
Well, a couple of places. I think I need to, if they're not already, I need to upload them and put them into our database, which anyone can go into. Marissa, they've been shared with like the Mount Morris Park Community Improvement Association, so I assume they'll be on their website as well. And City Parks has them too. Yeah, and again, a shout out to City Parks. I assume they're online. I don't know if they want to speak, but
I'm here.
Excellent, but they've been wonderful and our partners in this route. This is their park, and they've been, amazing this entire project. So thank you. Oh, and someone wants to speak from City.
Yes, hi, Kathy. It's Tapashi. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Tapashi Narayan. I am the Historic Harlem Parks Administrator, overseeing Marcus Garvey as one of my parks. I want to give a very big shout out to Kathy, Jenna, and Marissa for all their work on this project. I also want to mention they've created a story map that is accessible to the public, and I've shared it widely with the community boards. And we're so thankful to have this information and that Marcus Garvey has received this nomination. And also, like, considering that we are approaching America's 250th birthday, and Marcus Garvey is one of the earliest parks in our park system. It's a major accomplishment that we've made it so far, and it's great to have this historical information in our hands. So once again, I just want to give a big thank you and shout out to Kathy from SHAPO and Marissa and Jenna, the consultants who worked on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Gretchen, do I hear a motion?
You hear a motion.
Carol, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstain? The motion carries unanimously. Staying in New York.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm presenting the Church of St. Edward the Martyr, located at 8 to 14 East 109th Street in East Harlem, New York, which is locally significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture and meets criteria consideration A as a complex of religious buildings that includes a high Victorian Gothic style church, a parish house and rectory, housed in an early 20th century row building, and a mid-20th century community center. The period of significance begins in 1887 with the construction of the church and ends in 1961 with the construction of the community center, the third and final building in the complex. The property is sited on the south side of East 109th Street and is bound by Madison Avenue to the east, East 108th Street to the south, and Fifth Avenue and Central Park to the west. The surrounding lots are primarily occupied by brick and brownstone, multi-story apartment buildings dating from the late 19th to the early 20th centuries. The Church of St. Edward the Martyr, pictured here, is as an example of high Victorian Gothic religious architecture in East Harlem and New York City, and the earliest representative example in Harlem of the Anglo-Catholic architectural program adopted by some Episcopal congregations. The establishment of the church coincided with the rapid development of Harlem during the 1880s and was funded by prominent Manhattan Episcopalians, including John Jacob Astor and Commodore Elbridge T. Gerry, whose family took a leading role in the continued funding and development of the church. The church's simple, steep-gabled facade, its pointed arch stained glass windows, and its central entrance all typify a modest yet carefully planned high Victorian Gothic style religious building. All interiors for St. Edward the Martyr were designed by Charles R. Lamb, a prominent designer of ecclesiastical interiors and leading member of his father's firm, J&R Lamb Studios, and remain largely intact. This includes the choir, sanctuary furnishings, stained glass, marble, metalwork, and in particular, the grand Gothic-inspired reredos with glass mosaic and ornate woodwork pictured here. The interiors were highly praised upon their unveiling, and the New York Tribune described in detail the decorative elements that clearly reflected St. Edward's the Martyr Anglo-Catholic worship practices. Particular focus was given to Lamb's dramatic use of color and the reredos' mosaic. Elbridge T. Gerry amassed many real estate properties throughout New York, and in 1890, he conveyed a one-story frame building located on the lot immediately to the east of St. Edward the Martyr for use as the parish house. This building only remained in use for a few years until plans were filed for a new four-story brick building in 1894 with J.B. Roberts listed as the architect. The original plans stated the building was to include a lecture room and dwellings running the same length of the church. In 1920, the second, third, and fourth floors of the parish house were expanded to the same length as the church, and in 1927, a gym was constructed spanning the second floor to accommodate the Lake Delaware Boys Club summer camp, some members of which are pictured here. And the Gerry family established this club for local boys, welcoming them into the parish house to use the gym. By the late 1930s, the neighborhood had become increasingly West Indian and Puerto Rican, and St. Edward's opened its door to a local Spanish-speaking congregation. By 1955, a full Spanish language service had been adopted at the parish. The church continued its influence within the community, hosting street sweeping initiatives, summer camps, and a safe place for children to play. As the mission increased its community efforts, the diocese decided they needed more space and purchased the two tenements on the lots immediately to the west of the church, pictured here on the left, for demolition in 1961. They offered relocation services to the tenants, providing cash payments to those who self-relocated or writing letters to public housing developments requesting housing for others. Built in place of the tenements was a two-story utilitarian community center pictured on the right, designed by Mazza and Secchia. The center opened in March 1963. It housed a gymnasium for basketball and ballet classes, as well as a daycare center. So to conclude, the Church of St. Edward the Martyr demonstrates the dynamic history of East Harlem. Its ornate interior decoration welcomed an Anglo-Catholic community, predominantly of Western European descent, until the mid-1930s, when many West Indians moved to the neighborhood and took solace in a style of worship that was familiar to them. By the late 1950s, the church's membership consisted predominantly of both Black and Puerto Rican immigrants for whom the diocese built a community center, since the parish house no longer met the needs of the programs and events they wished to provide. Thus, the church's design remains central to the congregation's worship and is indicative of its place in East Harlem's ecclesiastical history. This nomination was prepared by Lindsay Papke as part of Professor Andrew S. Dolkart's National Register course in the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation at Columbia University, and we received one letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission.
Excellent. Anybody wish to speak remotely?
I don't think so.
Okay, questions or comments from the board about the Church of St. Edward the Martyr? Do I hear a motion?
I'll move.
Wint, do I have a second?
Second.
Heather, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries. Thanks, Jeff. All right, moving to Ulster County.
All right, good morning. This is the Rosa House located at 882 Burm Road in the hamlet of High Falls in Marbletown, Ulster County. The Rosa House is eligible for the state and national registers under criterion C for architecture as a rare surviving example of a late 18th century multiple-story Dutch colonial stone house in the Hudson Valley. The period of significance begins with the estimated date of the main building's construction in circa 1790. It extends through circa 1810 to incorporate the construction date of the kitchen wing addition, which is similar in design, building materials, and construction methods. The house also has two later additions built between 1950 and 1970. This part of Ulster County is particularly rich in architectural history because of its predominant and consistent pattern of stone construction. The considerable amount of stone deposits and mountain ranges in this area gave settlers an abundance of material that was quarried and cut for building purposes. Quarrying in Marbletown began in the late 17th century with the extraction and dressing of limestone found along the stone ridge that separated the Esopus and Rondout Creeks. Early stone houses built in Marbletown and the surrounding area share a similar vernacular design that made it a distinct style of its own. The region's plentiful resources resulted in a stone house typology that became a regional phenomenon, passed down through generations, and remained the predominant choice for residents until the 1840s. Initially, the vast majority of these houses were single-story and had one or two rooms. As building capabilities improved over time, the houses were built larger and incorporated linear extensions and multiple floors and rooms for living space. These houses were often built in phases and included a kitchen wing addition, as seen here with the Rosa House's addition to the west. During the later part of the 18th century, the two-story form slowly worked its way south from Kingston to areas like Marbletown. Yet these multiple-story houses were rare and even more so in rural areas. In 1798, there were only 5 two-story stone houses recorded in all of Marbletown. They were built with local limestone, have side gable roofs with asymmetrical facades, multiple story plans, and later side or rear additions. Similar to the other houses of this type, the facade of the Rosa House's original portion measures 4 bays in width and 2.5 stories in height with a side gable roof. The main entrance is slightly recessed and off-centered to the east. The door follows a traditional Dutch design and contains a transom window with a projecting curved wood hood above it. The house was built using a combination of bluestone and limestone and laid in an ashlar pattern. Most of the exterior stonework on the house is light colored. However, there are yellow and brown discolored stones on the back corner, which you can see in the lower photo here. This was brought on by years of rot from an ivy wall, which was removed before the current owners purchased the house. The kitchen wing addition is the earliest, built circa 1810, and is seen in the top 2 photos here. The wing is finished with coarse rubble stone that is visually similar to that of the original house. The 2 portions are separated by a distinct seam in the facade's wall. Directly west of the seam is another Dutch-style door, similar in design to the main houses, and provides access to the kitchen. Directly behind it is a small, single-story frame addition built circa 1950 for a dining room. The smallest and most recent was built circa 1970 for extra storage and is a 1-story cement block addition situated off the east elevation of the main house. It contains a Dutch-style modern door painted green to complement the other 2 entrances. Overall, the exterior retains its historic integrity and little has changed to the main house and kitchen wing addition. This is a floor plan of the first and second floors of the main block, the kitchen wing, dining room, and storage area. The evolution of the house with its additions reflects the changing needs of the occupants over time. The section in red is the 1790s main block, which contains the living room, main bedroom, and bathroom. The purple section is the 1810s addition, which contains the kitchen and the second bedroom above it. The yellow is the 1950s dining room, and the blue is the 1970s storage block. The interior, like the exterior, has been subtly updated over time, but it also retains its historic integrity. The plan and finishes of the main house are highly intact, including original floors, baseboards, and chair rails. The second floors and rooms added to the house have newer design elements that harken back to its original design, such as wood plank ceilings, hardwood floors, and exposed rafters. The basement and attic also retain most of their original materials and finishes, including the attic's wood plank walls and heavy timber trusses, and the basement's stone walls. The earliest known record of the property is from a 1797 map of Marbletown and shows it belonging to an A. Rosa, circled here in red. The map was originally labeled upside down, so it's been rotated. This property is attributed to Andres Rosa, born in 1721 and died in 1804, then later his son Andres Rosa, born in 1765 and died in 1832. The Rosas were descendants of one of the first Dutch families to settle Ulster County. Like other wealthy Dutch families with substantial farmland, the Rosas relied on the labor of enslaved Africans. Andres Rosa bequeathed enslaved persons under his ownership to his children, including Andres. According to census records, some may have worked and lived on this property. Unfortunately, little is known of their life here or what became of this enslaved community after emancipation in New York in 1827, and many formerly enslaved workers in this rural area relocated to larger cities. Andres sold the property to the Hasbrook family in 1824, and then it went to the Vandermarks in 1853. The map of Marbletown from 1875 on the right shows the name James H. Vandermark over the same property of A. Rosas in the previous map, also circled here. The property has had several different owners throughout the 20th century and was purchased in 2013 by this nomination's sponsors, Ippolita Ferrari and Mark Liebman. Not only is the Rosa House an excellent example of late 18th century, multiple-story Dutch colonial stone houses, but it also retains its historic integrity and is part of the region's rich architectural and social history. This nomination was prepared by consultant Gregory Pinto, homeowner Ippolita Ferrari, and myself. And I believe Ippolita is online with us today and wishes to say a few words.
Maybe.
Unmute.
Okay, Ippolita, if you wanted to say a words, go right ahead. That's okay. She was a delight to work with and sent her things earlier, so thank you.
Questions or comments about the Rosa House, Ulster County, from the board? Criterion C only for architecture. Do I have a motion?
Sorry, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Was there a window in that upper, on the second floor on the far right, or it's from the front, there's no, it just looks like the window got over time
on the
was
other
blocked
side.
in, on the other side on the.
It's very possible that it was closed in.
Oh,
yeah.
See evidence of it being closed in.
It's, yeah, it's
Hard to say.
hard to
just
say,
not
but
symmetrical.
it's.
It makes it asymmetrical.
There it is.
Very asymmetrical.
Right.
Looks as if, in fact, the building had been added to. And the door.
Had been on the end.
Is at the end of the
Yes.
original building.
Everything to the right of the door is possibly a later addition.
Yeah.
Yeah, hard to say.
Interesting comment. Any other questions? Do I hear a motion?
So move.
Thank you, Erica. A second? Second. Wayne, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. And I have one more.
Yep.
Okay, so next is the nomination for the Hillsdale Hamlet Historic District boundary expansion located in Columbia County. The boundary expansion will include the Hillsdale Highway 73, New York Route 23, which was accidentally excluded from the original 2009 nomination. The district was listed under criterion and and criterion C for architecture, which the Hillsdale High House falls under. The district's period of significance is from circa 1790 to 1945. The original nomination does not specify why the boundary ended before this property or give a reason why the house was excluded. Here's the current historic district map that shows the district's properties in green and where the Hillsdale High House is located directly adjacent to the boundary. The Hillsdale High House was built in 1938 by local architect Roy Van Duzen in the Craftsman bungalow style. He built the house using reclaimed materials from the old Hillsdale High School that he purchased and dismantled after its closing, hence earning the nickname Hillsdale High House. This map from 1888 shows where the high school was located and where the house was later built on the land next door. The map on the left shows the proposed boundary expansion to include the parcel for the Hillsdale High House, and the map on the right shows a close-up of the parcel's boundaries. The house next door to it on the west, situated right before New York Route 23 reaches Brady Lane, was also constructed in 1938 by Roy Van Duzen, but it does not retain its historic integrity from that period, so the boundary expansion should only include the Hillsdale High House. The house itself is a 1.5-story wood frame single dwelling. It has a gable roof and cedar shake and clapboard siding. There are 2 small windows in the front gable and a central entrance with a newer enclosed porch that surrounds the original 1930s porch. There is also a contributing garage in the rear. Despite the enclosed porch modification, most of the exterior retains its integrity and is representative of the Craftsman bungalow style. Furthermore, this style, while common in many other places in Columbia County, was not well represented in Hillsdale. There's only one other bungalow in the district, built in 1922, and is listed as a contributing resource. This absence is likely due to Hillsdale not being enough of a center to experience the effects of 20th century suburbanization. Craftsman bungalows and cottages are unusually rare, perhaps an indication of the poor economic times in rural areas of the Hudson Valley before and during the First World War. This side-by-side comparison shows an image of the house in 1938 from the film Hillsdale in the 1930s, A Swinging Town, which was created by an unknown filmmaker in 1936 to 38. Apart from the porch, the historic photo shows that the house is largely unchanged. After evaluating the Hillsdale High House, it should have been included in the original district's boundaries and was mistakenly left out. Its construction date falls within the district's period of significance. There's only one other contributing bungalow in the district, and it is a rare example of this architectural style in Hillsdale. This boundary expansion nomination was prepared by myself. Thank you.
Nice. Questions or comments from the board? I'll move to accept. Do I have a second?
Second.
Heather, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
We'll do the next 2 and then break for lunch.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
So I'm presenting Stuyvesant Gardens 1, which is being nominated under Criterion A in the areas of politics government and under Criterion C in the area of architecture. And the period of significance for this property encompasses the building's completion in 1972. Stuyvesant Gardens 1 is a public housing complex in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood of Brooklyn in New York City. In the early 20th century, in the 1930s through the 1950s specifically, Bedford-Stuyvesant became one of the largest Black communities in New York City, rivaling Harlem in Manhattan. The majority of residents lived in former row houses constructed at the turn of the 20th century, And in spite of racially motivated redlining practices, the neighborhood was characterized by a notably high rate of home ownership. Decades of disinvestment, however, led to growing pressure from Bedford-Stuyvesant's community groups for government funding and reinvestment in the area. In 1964, the city, probably foolishly, proposed demolishing a portion of the neighborhood south of Stuyvesant Gardens, which of course was quickly opposed by the neighborhood's established network of community groups and activists. This ultimately led to the much more nuanced efforts of the Model Cities program, which was an urban renewal program meant to improve the physical condition of the urban neighborhoods that maximized community involvement in the planning process and minimized displacement of existing residents. And I certainly want to acknowledge that urban renewal is a term with a fraught history, and I want to present urban renewal from the point of view of the Bedford-Stuyvesant community. One history of the neighborhood's community organizations noted that they had a, quote, pragmatic, unquote, pragmatic ambivalence towards urban renewal. So on the one hand, they absolutely opposed the indiscriminate use of eminent domain and demolition, but at the same time, they fought very hard for government renewal funds to improve the physical conditions of their neighborhood. So Stuyvesant Gardens 1 was the culmination of years of dialogue between these community groups and the city, and its design responded to the community's wishes in a couple of notable ways. Firstly, it has a vest pocket site plan, which is spread across portions of 2 city blocks that minimize demolition and the use of eminent domain. And it is also low-rise, standing only 4 stories tall, which mirrors the scale of the adjacent row houses. The complex comprises 27 buildings arranged in 5 clusters around, as I said, 2 partial city blocks, and each individual building has its own entrance and stairway. Stuyvesant Gardens 1 was designed by E.N. Toronto and completed in 1972 for the New York City Housing Authority. In addition to the 25 residential buildings, the complex also includes a community center and a daycare. So this is Stuyvesant Gardens 1. We have received a letter from the certified local government concurring that the property appears eligible for the state and national registers. This nomination was prepared by Heritage Consulting, and it is a tax credit project with an approved Part 1. And I believe we have James Hull, the senior project here from NYCHA, who would like to speak about this nomination.
Sorry, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is James Hull. I'm a senior project manager on the New York City Housing Authority's real estate development team. I'll say a couple quick words ahead of, well, I guess after one of the projects, but ahead of a few later projects that you'll hear about from Kath. All of these projects are going to be RAD conversions through NYCHA's PAC program. We're very excited to be presenting these projects to the New York State Board for Historic Preservation. The Historic Tax Credit Program has been critical to our mission to provide quality public housing to New York City residents while also preserving the architectural and social history of New York City. I wanted to say a special thank you to the SHPO team, especially Olivia, Sarah, Kath, and Chris for being true partners to NYCHA and for all of their hard work and thoughtfulness in making these projects happen. The Stuyvesant Gardens 1 development is part of the larger Ocean Hill and Stuyvesant Gardens PAC project. Sty Gardens 1 is located in the Bed-Stuy neighborhood of Brooklyn, consists of approximately 331 units. As Chris mentioned, this project represents an opportunity to preserve the perimeter block design in which the buildings maintain the streetscape continuity while providing central common areas within the block as open space. The Historic Tax Credit Program will be instrumental in financing comprehensive repair work for residents. The later NYCHA items on the agenda are 3 sites within the Jackie Robinson and Harlem scattered sites portfolio. These 3 developments are Corsi, Jackie Robinson Houses, and Morris Park Seniors. These sites are all located in Harlem and comprise of approximately 47% of the units in the overall PAC project of over 1,000 units. We anticipate beginning construction this year, and the Historic Tax credits are going to be critical in financing the comprehensive repair work for our residents. Thank you all, and we look forward to working with you on our future projects. Thank you.
Any other comments from remotely?
I believe that's it.
Okay, great.
Well, hi, this is Scott Doyle from Heritage Consulting Group, and we were the firm that prepared the nomination. So if there are any questions regarding the specific nominations, I'm available for both Sky Gardens one, and as James said, also for the Harlem Pact ones for Corsi Morris Park and Jackie Robinson later.
Excellent.
So thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Please.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask, I know why it makes sense to me that politics, government, and social history are the areas of significance A, but why do we put them under C, architecture? I'm just curious why these are classified under C. Is it just because an architect designed them?
No, this particular development we felt was unusual enough in the NYCHA design portfolio, and the perimeter block and the low rise and also the brutalist design all rose to the level of meriting
Level of
inclusion
architecture.
under.
Yeah, not beautiful, but
They're hideous.
typology. But it fits into a
Hideous warehousing of Black people. That's what I would say, but
Yeah.
okay. It's the truth.
Carol, question by Carol?
Actually, it's simply a comment, which is that I was really pleased to see in this nomination that an important source, Richard Rothstein's The Color of Law, was actually cited in the nomination.
true.
Which is a positive development in our
Indeed.
ongoing conversations regarding NYCHA nominations.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carol. Any other questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion to approve? Carol,
So moved.
do I have a second?
Second.
Heather, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? There being none, the motion carries.
My next item is the Home for the Aged in Ulster County, which is being nominated under criterion A in the area of social history and under criterion C in the area of architecture. The period of significance begins in 1929 when the building was completed, and it ends in 1974 when the operating model switched from a private philanthropy offering rent-free accommodations to a nonprofit model charging a modest rent. The home is located in Kingston in Ulster County. It is a few blocks south of the Stockade Historic District, and it's well uptown of the Rondout, which is along the waterfront. The building occupies a through block site with its facade on facing west onto Washington Avenue. There is a one-story addition that was built off the rear in 1999, seen in red. And while its footprint does look rather large on this map, it is minimally visible from the street, and the original 1929 building remains remarkably intact. The home was built in response to the growing need for safe, comfortable accommodations for an increasing number of senior residents in Kingston and the county at large. As the organization's meeting minutes described, the building, provided, quote, a suitable home for the proper care, support, and maintenance of respectable, aged, and indigent men and women of Ulster County, unquote. The building is also a strong example of colonial revival architecture. It was designed by local architect George Lowe, who is responsible for several of Kingston's notable colonial revival landmarks. The exterior is distinguished by its symmetrical design, including the prominent entrance pediment and the use of cast stone ornament. And the interior also retains much of its colonial revival design. Throughout much of the 20th century, the home was at capacity, and it offered housing through the charitable donation model without direct financing from the city or the state. The home remained in operation, as I said, in this capacity until 1974, when a new owner purchased the building and began operating it as a nonprofit, charging residents a modest rent. We have received letters of support from the city's mayor and the Historic Preservation Commission. This nomination was also prepared by Heritage Consulting, and it is also a tax credit project with an approved Part 1.
Any remote commenters?
Scott Doyle,
Hi.
probably still on.
Yeah, hi again, Scott Doyle from Heritage Consulting. Just want to thank you again for reviewing this, and the Part 2 has a conditional approval as well, so the project is definitely moving forward. and I'm available for any questions as needed. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion?
I'll move.
Wint, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Jennifer, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries unanimously. All right, is lunch here? All right, we'll break for lunch for a half hour. All right, we will restart our, or continue rather, pick up again with our National Register reviews and Aaron Zernecki, and will take us to Delaware County.
Good afternoon. All right, we're going to start the afternoon with a nice farm in Delaware County. This is the Walter Coulter Homestead Farm, located in the town of Bovina in Delaware County. It's locally significant under criteria A in the area of agriculture as one of a handful of surviving properties that are representative of lowland Scottish agricultural practice and habitation in the uplands of the northern Catskills. The property is also significant under criteria C for architecture as an intact and characteristic example of a type of wood frame house constructed regionally during the early 19th century. There are also 4 contributing outbuildings on the property. The property embodies the development of a family farm by generations of descendants, starting with Walter Coulter, the first son of lowland Scots forced to abandon their leased land in the Scottish borders during clearances from 1750 to 1820. Walter leased Lot 68 and Great Lot 40 of the Hardenberg patent in 1825. There he established and expanded one of numerous high elevation farms owned mainly by the descendants of the settler generation of Scottish immigrants. Like many of his neighbors, Walter bought the property he'd leased after the anti-rent war era of 1839 to 1845, when the land rents were eliminated by the new state constitution in 1846. By 1855, he owned 209 acres, and his family resided in a newly built wood frame house replacing an earlier residence. 4 generations of Walter's descendants operated and improved the farmstead until it was sold out of the family in 1948. The 1.5-story side-gabled center entrance house built circa 1855 typifies the colonial era hall and parlor prototype found throughout southern New England and central New York. The symmetry of the facade reflects preference of the mid-19th century for classical influences, including the entablature framing the main entrance with sidelights above the plain panels. Simple squared pilasters set off the sidelights from the door casing and clapboard walls of the house. A plain board lintel is capped by a heavy bed molding. The west elevation in the lower left image features 2 evenly spaced windows that flank the interior chimney flue centered on the wall, while the east elevation has a 1-story shed roof lean-to that spans the length of the house, and that's in the upper left image. The first floor interior layout incorporates a center stair hall extending roughly 2/3 the depth of the house. This is flanked by 2 large rooms on either side of the hall in the front of the house. While these houses present as symmetrical, the rooms on either side of the side center hall differ somewhat in width. Usually the more formal parlor, marked by the finest trim scheme, is slightly narrower than the opposite room, which serve multiple everyday family uses. A row of small rooms spans the rear third of the house. Upstairs, the slope of the roof creates low ceiling spaces at both the front and the rear of the house. These areas were used as small bedrooms and as attics for storage. In the Coulter house, there is 1 full-height room on either side of the hall, the east one wider than the west one, matching the widths of the rooms below. The large 3-story barn, built circa 1850, embodies 3 phases of use for this agricultural outbuilding. The ground floor basement of the barn was designed for the early emphasis of the farm on cattle for the beef market, and then later butter production. The entire basement is whitewashed, as was standard for dairy farms by the 1920s. The present 2-story mow was built in the 1870s to replace an earlier structure over the basement. The most apparent improvement is the large stone-faced earthen bank accessing the haymow. A small wood frame milk house built circa 1940 was the last addition on the main barn to support the move towards fluid milk production over butter in the 20th century. And that's in the upper image, and the milk house is in the lower left of the barn. Other existing outbuildings include a tool barn built in around 1885, midway between the house and the main barn, and a small spring house built around 1940 east of the tool barn. And this is the Walter Coulter Homestead Farm. Are there any questions?
No remote speakers?
No.
Questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Heather got the motion. Wint, you got the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Motion carries.
Next, we move on to the Jefferson Historic District. And this is located in the northern Catskill region, in the town of Jefferson, Schoharie County. The district is being nominated under Criterion A for community development and planning as an intact and representative crossroads hamlet within the regionally important highway network. Jefferson is also significant under Criterion C for architecture. Its built environment represents its growth during the first half of the 19th century as a crossroads hamlet that connected trade from east to west and north to south. A second round of economic prosperity based on large-scale butter manufacture at the turn of the 20th century both preserved much of the hamlet and expanded it beyond its earliest boundary. The Jefferson Historic District consists of 72 contributing primary buildings, 17 non-contributing primary buildings, and 3 sites. There are 2 previously listed buildings in Jefferson. The former Presbyterian Church is now a Maple Museum, and a 13-sided barn. The built environment in Jefferson aligns with early highway development. It is located at the meeting of important travel routes connecting this region to other areas and facilitating trade from the interior of New York to Atlantic markets. Summit Street, State Route 10, comes from the north through Jefferson before heading east on Main Street. Peck Street, County Road 42, runs south from Jefferson into Delaware County, establishing the north-south alignment of a turnpike chartered by the 1840s. North Harpersfield Road, County Road 2A at the west end of the hamlet, and East Main Street, State Route 10 from the east-west, or form the east-west route to which most of the hamlet is oriented. This route began as the Albany and Delaware Turnpike, chartered in 1805, spurring the settlement of Jefferson by New England immigrants coming from Connecticut. These settlers brought a village plan that centered on a square, or village green, and a tradition of wood frame building technology. Virtually all of the buildings constructed in Jefferson during the 19th century were wood frame structures. And here are some more views of the square at the top image. That's in the middle of the village. Peck Street, County Road 42, heading south from Jefferson, is in the lower left. And East Main Street, State Route 10, coming from the east into Jefferson, is in the lower right. Some of the earliest surviving buildings in Jefferson exhibit the forms, massing, and details characteristic of Greek Revival taste, which became popular in the 1830s in rural New York State. These 2 examples, along with the church, the 2 examples of the residences, look almost identical in their 2-story and wing with pediment, corner pilasters, and entablature around the door. This style, the Greek Revival style, is also expressed in the 1836 Presbyterian Church in the lower image, and that is now the Maple Museum in town. Residential buildings constructed during the later 19th century reflect changing trends, with styles such as the Italianate, shingle, Queen Anne along Main Street, east and west of the square. Residential construction continued into the first half of the 20th century when the area was well known for its creamery industry. And this large brick Georgian Revival school, built in 1936, replaced an earlier school building and consolidated the local rural school districts. 1936 is also the end of the period of significance with the building of this school. Because mainly there's few buildings in Jefferson that postdate the mid 20th century when the economy constricted in the area. Despite economic hardship, Jefferson's built environment retains a high degree of historic integrity representative of its historic development and use. Its square is an unusual feature in this part of New York State, with the commercial, civic, and residential buildings surrounding this focal point of the community. And this nomination was sponsored by the Jefferson Historical Society with grant funding from the Preservation League of New York State, with preservation consultant Jesse Ravage as the writer of the nomination. We have received 3 letters of support for the historic district and 8 letters of objection. And this is the Jefferson Historic District. Any questions? Yes.
First, just one note, I have to, as NYSCA, I have to say it's Preservation League of New York State and New York State Council on the Arts funding for those award grants. And then my common question is when there are objections, could you share the reasons?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, the objections are mainly kind of what we normally see as well, of the fact private property owners have concerns about whether or not the historic district will have any regulations for what they can and cannot do to their properties. We have had quite a few meetings, along with a public meeting, which we always do for historic district. I was down there about a month ago and gave a public meeting. So we have tried to relay those concerns and get out the information about National Register as much as possible.
Did the objectors participate in the public meeting?
I am not sure. I know that there was a few people at that public meeting that did have concerns, but I'm not aware that all of the objectors were at the.
Is the 1936 school in?
Yes.
It's the bookend.
Yes.
And did you say that the church became a maple?
It's a maple museum. Yeah. Yep.
What percentage of the objectors from the whole?
That's a good question.
We have about 82 property owners in the district. And like I said, we have 8 objections.
10% if my math is correct.
Very well done.
Right?
Keep
Any
it
other-
under 50.
Any other questions or comments? Do I hear a motion?
So move.
Erica, a second?
Second.
Gretchen got it. All in favor? Any opposed or abstained? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have 2 nominations today. You may have seen 3 on the agenda, but the Bragg House will be moved to June.
Oh, good, because we didn't have a form for that one. Good.
Okay. Cattaraugus County Memorial and Historical Building in Little Valley, New York, is being nominated to the National Register of Historic Places under Criterion A in the area of social history, with a period of significance extending from its completion in 1914 until the relocation of the Little Valley Library from the building in 1962. This property has a long history with the State Historic Preservation Office, as we have grappled with its potential eligibility since 2015. In 2023, SHPO engaged the National Park Service for an informal review. While the Park Service agreed that the building does not meet Criterion C for architecture, they provided guidance on possible areas of significance to explore, including social history, education, or both. To be clear, NPS did not say the building was eligible. They simply provided some thoughts on how one might evaluate, on how one might make an argument, excuse me. With this nomination, we ask that the board carefully evaluate the social history argument presented and ultimately determine if the property meets the National Register criterion for evaluation. In conjunction with the county's centennial, Cattaraugus County and a citizens committee commissioned the Memorial and Historical Building in 1908. It opened in 1914 to house, quote, memorial relics and as a memorial to our soldiers and sailors who enlisted in the Civil War from this county, end quote. Subsequently, the building has undergone change. The Historical Society initially operated the facility until the 1920s, when it became the home of the Little Valley Library. A red brick addition seen to the right of the memorial in this photograph was built in 1952 as an office for the County Motor Vehicles Bureau. This addition was a hyphen that connected the memorial and library to the county clerk's office, an earlier two-story adjacent building that was demolished in 1968. In 1953, the County Museum opened to the public within the memorial building, which also continued to house the Little Valley Library. Architectural features of the building lost during this time include the crowning glass dome, the entrance pediment, finials, and the terracotta cartouches flanking the entrance. The primary entrance to the memorial leads to an octagonal-shaped center hall finished with a multicolored decorative mosaic tile flooring. Historic design elements, including slate baseboards, wood trim, doors, and display casework, remain intact and in good condition. Since its inception, the monument has served as a reunion site for veterans groups and veterans' descendants. The joining together of library and museum drew in many additional visitors. Various community groups and organizations, such as the Daughters of the American Revolution, to name just one, regularly use the building's library and museum space as a location for events and meetings related to local history. The museum also frequently hosted school field trips, still fondly remembered by many of the local residents. Today, the red brick building is the home of the Citizens Advocating Memorial Preservation, a private group who are dedicated to the preservation and promotion of the Cattaraugus County Memorial and Historical Building. This is a true example of grassroots preservation, and the building appears to have deep meaning and significance to the community. Their reasons for seeking listing are both honorific and the possibility of obtaining grants for the building's successful rehabilitation. Oh, too far. Okay. This nomination was prepared by Clinton Brown Company Architecture and has received 20 letters of support. And we have a request to say a few words now from Mark Dunkelman, I believe is here. Oh. Come on up to the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Mark Dunkelman. I reside in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm here to represent Citizens Advocating Memorial Preservation, commonly known as CAMP. Our group was formed in 2014 to prevent the planned demolition of the Cattaraugus County Memorial and Historical Building. We were successful in that effort, and in 2017 purchased the building from the county. Since then, we have worked to prevent further deterioration of the structure and have developed plans for its rehabilitation. From the beginning, we've been advised that listings on the state and national registers of historic places are key to a successful outcome. For us campers, the Memorial and Historical Building is more than the brightest architectural gem in the village of Little Valley. It is more than an abandoned structure that was once a source of civic pride and can be once again. It is more than a building that should be saved because of its obvious historic importance. To us, the memorial is Cattaraugus County's most prominent and significant Civil War monument, standing proudly in the heart of the county seat to honor all 3,500 of the county's Civil War veterans who saved our nation from splitting asunder during its gravest crisis and helped to eradicate the sin of slavery from the land. Many members of camp and our supporters are descendants of Cattaraugus County Civil War soldiers. Some of our ancestors were present on September 7th, 1914, when the memorial was dedicated. My great-grandfather, Corporal John Longhantz of the 154th New York Volunteer Infantry, was there. I've found him on this panoramic photograph taken on the occasion. I can only imagine the pride he and his fellow veterans felt when they read the inscription on the plaque above the doors. To the memory of its soldiers and sailors in the War of the Rebellion, this building is erected by Cattaraugus County. To camp, the memorial is a shrine. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
And I believe Greg Pinto, who helped write the nomination, is also here to say a few words.
Thank you
Go ahead.
thank you for your attention today. I'll keep it brief. As the primary author of this nomination and the one digging into the history and trying to come at this nomination from every angle possible, I just want to thank you for your time and consideration for this. This is a very unique, important building, and the people of camp and Mark have just done so much to fight for this little old building, and the things that will be done with the nomination will really help that and Little Valley as a whole. I just want to thank them and Daniel, Chelsea, and everybody at SHPO for their time consideration with this process, because it's been a long one, but I feel it's been very rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice. Questions or comments from the board?
Well, it may not be central to what we're doing here today, but what in the world happened to the collections?
I can answer that.
You need a mic.
Thanks.
The memorial building served as intended as the County Historical Museum until 2004, when the museum was moved 23 miles away from the county seat to a town called Machias. Cattaraugus County had poured $1 million into renovating a historic structure there, the Stone House, the former county pearl farm. So that's where the museum went. And then the memorial building, which could have used that $1 million over the years to keep it up, just continued to deteriorate. And consequently, it was empty until the county voted unanimously in 2013 to use $125,000 in casino funds to demolish it. So that is the background on that regard.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I guess I have, so I appreciate there's a love of this building in the community. For my colleagues on the board, I'm just going to share the thing I struggle with that I would love to hear from you all on is since the case has to be A and F, to me, that's inherently related to the architecture, meaning if the case is about the memorialization, about the Civil War memorial, and yet the building doesn't represent the way it was, can those two things be separated, I guess, is my question or my struggle in terms of making the case that it could fulfill social history and commemorative monument without the integrity of the building. Am I making sense with what I'm saying? This is just where I'm kind of struggling to know where to go. And that's why if anyone else is willing to comment, I'd really love to hear other perspectives because I was having trouble with this one because of that.
Well, I mean, I would solicit a professional opinion from SHPO, but in my estimation, I think criterion C architecture can be easily separated from criterion A in the social history context. And I don't think it requires that it be eligible under C in order to fulfill A. Okay. Does that make sense?
I need a mic. Yeah, I mean, again, it's up to the board to decide on this. I guess the question pertinent to architecture, is it largely the loss of the dome that is the major concern? You know, some of the details, the entrance, I believe. You know, I think I'm not going to answer the question, but is there enough there to, if this is a social history argument under criterion A, and if you're saying, well, what this building once housed in a way to, I mean, we have to weigh what's left on the interior, and I will just put that out there for consideration. What is the interior integrity? And then what are you struggling with perhaps more probably on the exterior? Okay. So, but I can't answer the question for the board, but this is what we.
But can you answer the technical question? Can something be eligible under criterion A without being eligible under any architectural consideration?
You still have to be able to obviously read the building, the spaces, and this is where you're getting at, Christian, what it represents, you know. Obviously, it was more than, it is a memorial, but it was more than a memorial, right? You had a museum, you had a library in there, you had different social history uses. So I guess I would submit the interior is important as well.
Thank you. How far away from criterion C is this building, and is it the removal of the dome as the primary problem? And is that something that could be replaced?
I don't know what the plans. Okay, I don't know what the plans. I know
Is it equivalent to replacement windows or something? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's a significant feature.
Yeah, it is a significant feature that is missing. That's right, and that's probably where we struggled the most. I don't know what the future plans are for the building.
Could you?
In terms of, are they going to restore the dome? I mean, I'm pretty sure you just put a new roof on to keep the water out of the building, which is important.
Could you quickly click back and forth several times between an old picture and the new picture?
So you lost sort of the attic parapet. In
No,
addition
that's
to
super
the
helpful.
dome.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Just go back
Molly.
again.
You know, I will submit too, it's also, yes, integrity is an important factor in this, but it's also locally significant. I think locally, well, yes, locally what it means to the community, which we have heard, you know, from the camp advocates here, what it means to the community.
Molly.
I have a question with regard to consideration F, the commemorative monument. So I think maybe I'm interpreting this. It was built as a monument. It is still a monument. I mean, we've actually heard very clearly from the representative from camp and from the author that that's what this is in the minds of the community, and it is actually served that purpose its entire life, and it is empty of materials related to the museum or explicit education, but as a monument, it is educational. That is, in theory, the purpose of a monument. And without knowing, I'm assuming the considerations for evaluation and integrity are the same for a monument, but given that it is, the elements of it are, to me, seem pretty legible, and the interior has a integrity as well, that maybe there's more, I don't want to say flexibility, but focusing on criteria F as a monument, which it sounds like, and I know we can't evaluate this on potential future plans, but that's the intention, is that this remain a monument in perpetuity in some form or fashion. I think you can argue that for almost any type of architecture, but this is explicitly designed as such and has retained that purpose. So I just think that's important.
Thank you. Good. Other, please, Gretchen.
I've long thought that the National Register guidelines are old-fashioned and antiquated. It seems to me that this building, yeah, I wish it had its dome, but there are many communities that we have looked at that we've struggled with this issue of integrity. And I think for me, as a historian who deals with also the history of museums as well as the history of African American communities, the history, it fits right into that history of museums, this kind of cabinet of stuff that was preserved to protect a particular story. I love the picture of the lady with the gun. And there's that one. There she is. But certainly the one on the right as well. It's also the story of what happens when these folks come back from the Civil War. So I see this as an important local historical story, even if as part of a larger national story. And I would, even though the building has lost a lot of its integrity, there are lots of historic buildings out there that have lost their integrity that need to be recognized. So I'm all for it.
And I agree with my colleague.
I like the fact that when built and opened, they used the old term. They may not have used the exact words, but the slaveholders' rebellion. We've tried to be nice, and so we call it the Civil War, but it was the slaveholders' rebellion. And that's what they remembered out in Cattaraugus County.
I also think that it's important that actually on the building, written in stone, is commemorating. If there was nothing written on the building, but it's actually written on the building above the doorway, commemorating our Civil War veterans, and then on the side there's another sign that's written in stone. To me, that really shows that this is a commemorative monument.
Is it still there?
Do I hear a motion?
I'll move it.
Gretchen, do I have a second? Does anyone want to say anything else?
Quick question. Are those still, can we see the current image again? How they're just brought up?
Yes.
Is that still?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Over the top.
Yep. Thank you. Because in the photo.
Do I have a second? Molly, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? The motion carries.
Thank you. I would like to add something. We've discovered the original plans for this place, and our intention is to put that dome back.
Way to go.
Oh.
To get down the steps.
All right.
Out of Chautauqua County?
Out of Chautauqua County.
Yeah. Good discussion, board. Way to go.
The First Presbyterian Church of Jamestown. This meets criterion C for listing in the National Register of Historic Places as a significant example of 20th century Romanesque ecclesiastical architecture. exhibiting the work of Cram and Ferguson of Boston, a nationally known architecture firm, and additional work by prominent local architects Beck and Trinkum. The building retains a high degree of architectural integrity to the period of significance, 1925 to 1966. The design of the building fell to Ralph Adams Cram, shown here on the December 1926 cover of Time magazine, only a year after the First Presbyterian Church held its first service in the newly erected chapel, now 100 years ago. Cram was described in the accompanying article as, quote, the Gothic master builder of the U.S., end quote. Yet First Presbyterian is an outstanding example of the Romanesque style, and a very rare one, being one of only 3 Cram designed in this style, and it is his only work of any kind in Western New York. Plans for expansion to the church occurred almost immediately, resulting in the construction of the 1926 annex and parish house. Further expansion to the building occurred in 1961 with the construction of the education building and chapel and cloister in 1992. The interior of First Presbyterian retains a high degree of integrity to the original design. Cram conceived the sanctuary as a modernized Italian basilica with 3 aisles, load-bearing masonry walls, a wood truss gable roof, and semicircular door and window openings and apse. Every aspect of the building was carefully chosen to create a cohesive and unified design, including the doors and windows, furnishings, sculptures, light fixtures, and all the interior finishings for the ceilings, floors, walls, and furniture. The period of significance ends in 1966 with the installation of stained glass windows created by French master artist Gabriel Loire. Initially, only a few stained glass windows, such as the one seen on the left by artist Henry Wright Goodhue, were commissioned as a cost-saving measure. Temporary pastel windows from a local manufacturer took the place of the intended stained glass and were periodically replaced until finalized with the installation of the Loire windows, seen on the right in the clerestory and wheel window. Cram advocated for the use of traditional building methods and skilled craftsmen. The sanctuary reflects medieval construction techniques, including columns and piers, engaged buttresses, groin and barrel vaults, and decorative arcades. The building is highly embellished with limestone details, including classical moldings, dentils, cornices, scrolls, and column capitals. Brick and limestone are used in combination to create decorative stripes and counterchange patterns on the surface of the walls. Blocks of limestone laid in an asymmetrical pattern and bas-reliefs of Christian symbols decorate the street-facing elevations. Each of the bell tower's 5 stories is decorated with a unique structural polychrome pattern. The tower is surmounted by a heavy cornice, 2 windowless attics, and a pyramidal roof. A 7-foot bronze cross rests on the tower's roof ridge. This nomination was prepared by John Patrick Smagner. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions from the board, First Presbyterian Church. Please.
The asymmetric block pattern on the front, I think it was the picture just before that.
Yeah.
Is there a reason for that? I'm just curious, is it purposely done to look like a mistake because it can't be perfect
Because
or?
only the Lord is perfect.
So the
Yeah,
answer to
something
that
like
is
that,
yes.
because it's terribly annoying to my OCD.
The building was
style.
patterned after or influenced by several different, mostly Italian churches. And Cram designed the building in such a way that it would appear to have been reworked over time, even though it was built that way initially.
Yeah.
It's bothering you.
It's really, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's like, I want to go up there and just
Fix it.
fix, yeah.
Do I hear a motion? I'll move it. Can I have a second?
Yeah.
Molly, all in favor?
Yeah, I'll say.
Any opposed or abstain? We're good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Erie County,
That would-
my home county.
How full that sanctuary is on Sunday.
These days, it's probably empty. Yeah, that's what I just said. It's its own.
No, that's good.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. On to Erie County.
My hometown.
The Ahavas Achim Cemetery is significant under Criterion A in the area of Jewish ethnic history and under Criterion C as a good example of a 20th century Jewish congregational cemetery that meets Criteria Consideration D. It is located on Pine Ridge Heritage Boulevard in Cheektowaga, Erie County, amongst a collection of independently incorporated cemeteries. The period of significance begins in 1917 with the opening of the cemetery and ends in 1975, reflecting its ongoing use. While it is common for Christian graveyards to be adjacent to their churches, most Jewish cemeteries are sited far from their associated synagogues due to rules which forbid the Kohanim, a priestly caste, from coming in contact with the dead. This is why Ahavas Achim Cemetery is in Cheektowaga, while the original synagogue was located at 833 Fillmore Ave in Buffalo. It is likely that the Cheektowaga site was chosen due to the existence of other Jewish cemeteries at Pine Ridge, the first being Temple Beth El in the 1870s. Nearly 50 years later, Charles Polikov, a commercial real estate agent and president of Temple Beth El, sold the cemetery property to Ahavas Achim for $1. The Ahavas Achim Synagogue was established by a core group of Polish Jews who immigrated to Buffalo in the 1890s, and soon included Jews from other areas of Eastern and Central Europe. The congregation underwent significant growth in the 1910s and 20s, the time at which the cemetery was established. A second period of growth occurred in the years surrounding World War II, when Ahavas Achim experienced an influx of Jewish refugees, concentration camp survivors, and displaced persons who made their way to Buffalo. In the mid-20th century, changing employment patterns and increasing wealth led to the Jewish community's movement away from the East Side. In 1950, Ahavas Achim merged with the Anshe Lubavitch Synagogue and moved to a new location at 345 Tacoma Ave. 10 years later, the merged congregation established a religious school in Williamsville, reflecting intensifying suburbanization patterns. Then in 1969, Ahavas Achim Lubavitch moved entirely to this site, where they have remained since. Ahavas Achim's design is typical for a small Jewish cemetery and contains over 700 graves, all of which face east to Jerusalem. Jewish gravestones often have 6 elements, which typically follow this pattern: 8 carved decoration, an optional introductory phrase such as beloved mother or wife, the person's name in Hebrew and English, the person's date of death in both the Hebrew and Gregorian calendars, the age of the deceased, and an epitaph ranging from traditional abbreviations to extensive verse. Grave iconography tends to fall within a few categories, being symbols of nature, such as animals and plants, symbols of gender. Candlesticks indicate a woman's grave, as the act of candle lighting on Shabbat was historically associated with women. Symbols of profession or roles, such as outspread fingers, which indicate a Kohen or descendant of the Kohanim. symbols of Judaism, such as Stars of David and menorahs, and not exclusive to Jewish iconography, but a few graves do feature porcelain cameos, as can be seen on this slide. A unique element of the cemetery is the collection of impressive monuments alongside Pine Ridge Heritage Boulevard. High vertical monument styles were typical of Eastern European Jewish graves, especially in Poland, Russia, and present-day Ukraine, where many of the interred immigrated from. Their ornate carvings convey the prosperity achieved by the congregation's earliest members and represent a connection to their former homelands. The cemetery additionally features a notable gateway and chapel, both built in an Egyptian revival style. The gateway was designed by Jewish architect Eli W. Goldstein and erected in 1918. The chapel was designed by an unknown architect and built in 1925. The use of Egyptian revival for Jewish funerary structures dates to the mid-19th century and can be seen at such locations as the Old Jewish Cemetery in Newport, Rhode Island, which is the oldest surviving Jewish burial site in the country. The Ahavas Achim Cemetery represents the oldest continuously used site associated with that congregation. Previous synagogue buildings have been demolished or converted into churches, altering their ability to communicate their Jewish heritage. Only the cemetery has remained intact for over a century and is the final resting place for generations of Buffalo Jews. Its continual use establishes a tangible connection to ancestors and represents the dynamics of immigration in the United States. This is an honorary nomination sponsored by the Buffalo Jewish Federation Cemetery Corporation and was written by Dr. Chana Ravel Kotzin. We have received one letter of support from Assemblyman Kludzinski. Any questions?
Questions or comments from the board? I like the addition of the glossary nomination form. That was super helpful and very informative. That building is open and damaged. Is there?
Indeed. So Ahavas Achim is one of several Jewish cemeteries that are located in this area, one of which has an ohel for Rabbi, hold on, I've got his name. Joseph, who is, I think, believed to be the first Orthodox rabbi to die in North America and is a pilgrimage site. So they're planning on converting this into sort of visitor center with functioning restrooms, part of which is also necessary due to the practice of washing your hands when you leave a cemetery. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is, I'm sorry, if I'm allowed to talk, this is Jonathan Schechter from the Jewish Federation Cemetery Corp. And Dr. Chana Kotzin is on too.
Yes, please.
Yeah, oh, thank you so much. So first of all, I'd like to thank Campbell for her support and her help. I'd like to thank Dr. Chana Kotzin, who was really invaluable to help us try to put this beautiful cemetery as a funerary on. And yes, to answer your question, our plan is we've actually run a budget and we've raised about 50% of the fundraising to actually bring that building back so it would be a visitor center, because we have thousands of individuals that come up and pray at the gravesite of Rabbi Joseph Rabinowitz, who was actually the first Hasidic Eastern European rabbi, Orthodox, to pass away in the United States. He was from outside of Kiev, and it's become a very holy site. And that was one of the reasons that we started looking at this, because we actually were looking at the building and the rehab and talking to SHPO, and then we realized, we have really something special here with the gates and the history of the community that we should really consider putting the whole funerary on. Hannah, I didn't know if you have anything else to add.
Yes, I just had a few words. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Oh, lovely. Yes. Yes, I just wanted to reiterate everything that Jonathan has said and to thank Campbell. And really to say that there's really very limited remaining built Jewish environment in Greater Buffalo for this era. You know, the cemetery structures are highly unusual compared to other cemeteries in the area. And it's not just that the built environment is missing for Jewish history in Greater Buffalo. A lot of the archival material relating to this specific congregation is almost non-existent. There has been a collecting project for archival materials for the Jewish community organizations in Buffalo, but sadly this particular congregation has had the least remaining archival materials, and its built structures are either demolished or are now repurposed. And so this particular cemetery is literally the only thing that it maintains a continual historical physical record of the community itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Carol, can I have a second?
Second.
Kristen got it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? There being none, the motion carries. Thanks, Campbell. Monroe County next.
Greetings. This is the Colgate-Rochester Crozer Divinity School in Rochester. The Colgate-Rochester Crozer Divinity School in Rochester is significant under Criterion A for Education and Religion and under Criterion C for Architecture and Landscape Architecture. Its period of significance begins with the completion and occupation of the initial buildings in 1932 and ends in 1974 with the termination of the Martin Luther King Jr. Fellowship Program, one of the last groundbreaking progressive theological programs sponsored by the school. The Colgate-Rochester Divinity School is eligible under Criterion C for Architecture and Landscape Architecture. At the core of this hilltop campus sits an assembly of fine collegiate Gothic buildings, complete with the spires, oriel windows, leaded window panes, ornate carvings, and other fine details so associated with the style. Nationally renowned architect James Gamble Rogers, best known for his designs for Yale University's original residential colleges, conceived of the campus's original components. These cap a largely pastoral landscape design created by important local landscape architect Alling de Forest. The largely rambling, picturesque arrangements of campus buildings contrasts actually with Rogers' urban campus quadrangle designs elsewhere. The original James Gamble Rogers buildings include four major elements that occupy the center of the campus grounds. A couple of later components are added to the north later on. The original James Gamble Rogers buildings include Montgomery Hall, which served as the president's house. Though on a domestic scale, the stone-framed leaded glass windows in particular make a connection between it and the campus's more monumental elements. A De Forest designed formal garden is integrated with it on the south and west, and that's what you're seeing on the left, albeit covered in snow. The central academic building, integrating Strong Hall, the Swayze Library, Jones Hall, and Colgate Memorial Chapel, the latter an 1936 edition, is shown here. Here, towers and turrets, Gothic traceried and Tudor oriel windows, and elaborately carved stonework express fully this style derived from British collegiate origins. The public spaces of the interior also provided the expected wood paneling and soaring vaults, and in the instance of the chapel, of course, also the stained glass windows. The next component then also is the original dormitory building, Trevor and Eaton Halls. This block is built into the slope of the campus grounds as they descend southward, giving a pretty monumental effect from the street. Throughout all of these buildings, March finely crafted details such as stone carvings that are both purely decorative but also of symbolic content. For example, like on the upper right, the crests with the symbols of the four evangelists. And there are even molded bricks, which you see in the bottom left, which speak in ancient tongues to the onlookers. The final original James Gamble Rogers component is actually a rather substantial collegiate Gothic garage, which you are seeing both sides of here. The Arling de Forest landscape plan remains visible not only in the formal garden attached to the president's house, but in the drives and the paths, and in the dispersal of trees to the perimeter of the amply sloping lawn. Some parts of the landscape plan were never constructed, and others were altered or replaced by later construction. Indeed, later dormitory construction kind of did away with some tennis courts and the auditorium space that you see in the upper right there. In 1936, the campus got additions, not only the chapel added to the main academic building, but also two dormitories for married students. These are Beaven and Axling halls, which are down the back or the north slope of the campus, down the slope. These married student houses largely harmonize, though, with the original intent of the design. These, with their half timbering and complicated roof lines, relate more to pretty typical 1930s tastes in domestic design. The final additions to the campus, two additional mid-century modern dormitories, Sanders and Andrews Hall, the former by architect C. Storrs Barrows, arguably intervene with Rogers' intent, but they still contribute to the campus's overall story. This is because, in addition to its significance as an expertly designed, idealized academic retreat, the campus complex also sheltered major trends in 20th century theological education. The Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School in Rochester is also eligible under criterion A for education and religion. The campus was the near 90-year home of an educational and religious institution at the center of local and national discourses around theology, social inclusion, and civil rights through the 20th century. With past professors like pioneering evangelical liberal William Newton Clark and social gospel exponent Walter Rauschenbusch, the Colgate and Rochester seminaries passed on a liberal theological reputation to the Colgate Rochester Divinity School, created from the 1928 merger of these two Baptist institutions. In response to increasing secularism in the post-war period, Colgate Rochester Divinity School faculty and administration pioneered both Christian ecumenism as well as controversial new theologies, particularly connected with the death of God ideas associated with their professor, William Hamilton. It also responded to 1960s social movements with curricular and administrative innovations like the merger with the historically female Baptist Missionary Training Society in 1962, making the institution increasingly coeducational. And this was in the midst, of course, of the second wave feminist movement. Also, there was a Black Church Studies program created in 1969 in the midst of the Civil Rights Movement. And in 1970, there was the merger with Crozier Theological Seminary, Martin Luther King Jr.'s alma mater. All of these measures sought to alleviate the voices of groups of traditionally marginalized peoples that were usually on the outside of mainstream religious institutions. This application was written by Dr. Jeff Jovanone and Tyler Lucero for the Landmark Society of Western New York. It is a commercial tax credits project, and we have received one letter of objection from the owner of the two little married Tudor dorms in the back. I talked to a representative from them as recently as yesterday, clarifying that listing put no restrictions on what they could do with the dwelling, and kind of had hoped that I'd get a retraction yesterday, but it did not happen at this point. It is certainly supported by the city, who has locally landmarked most of the campus. Are there any questions?
Who owns it and what's the plan?
Well, so there are lots of LLCs, largely represented by one person, who own the most of the campus, and then there is a separate landlord for the two dormitories. The tax credit project with which this was involved was converting the president's house into luxury apartments. There are lots of different functions scattered throughout the complex currently, including, I believe, a charter school, event space. I guess you can use it for weddings and things like that. And actually, I think the American Heart Association office is in one of the dormitory buildings. So it has lots of different uses.
Okay. Questions or comments?
Has the Baptist institution gone somewhere else?
They bought a commercial building downtown.
Okay, that concludes our discussion. Before we go to the board for a vote or a motion, I just want to state that Wayne Goodman is recusing himself because of some involvement with entities involved in this project. So Wayne is off the quorum for this vote. And having that said, do I have a motion? Okay, I'm going to give Wayne, and you, Molly gets the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? And one recusal. Thank you.
I just want to congratulate Jonathan and Jeff on that really, really interesting nomination. In case you didn't pick up, that's our own Jeff who wrote that. So good afternoon. I have 6 nominations in case anyone needs to fortify themselves before we begin. What's the, here we go. Okay. Or get out while the getting's good. And I'm going to start with 2 from Syracuse that happen to be right next to each other. And since they are not linked in theme, period, or style, we did them as 2 individual nominations. However, they are both tax credit projects with the same owner, and both nominations were prepared by Kim Dalater from Traceries. So this is a postcard of the Syracuse Boys Club, constructed in 1922-23 to the design of prominent Syracuse architect Melvin King. As a young man, King was a partner of Archimedes Russell, and he later formed the prolific local firm of King & King with his son. This is a contemporary photo, and the exterior is exceptionally intact, but you can see that it received an upper story addition in 1988 when it was converted to a law office. Nothing was removed to create the addition, and it's actually not very visible at the street level, especially because the building still retains its distinctive overhanging Spanish tile roof. The building has a steel frame construction with brick, limestone, and terracotta cladding, and it's distinguished by Tudor arches, pressed copper detailing, stylized pilasters, and bracketed cornices. And the one significant exterior change is the loss of the original diamond pane windows. The Syracuse Boys Club is architecturally significant as an outstanding example of collegiate Gothic style architecture in Syracuse, a city with relatively few examples of the style, as a significant work in this style by Melvin King, and for the way that the high style design demonstrates the sense of importance that was associated with the Boys Club as an educational institution. So these are the side and rear elevations. And then here is the close-up of the entrance from the interior and from the exterior and the interior. The building is also significant in social history as a social services institution established for the benefit of the city's youth and for its association with Boys Clubs of America, a significant social reform institution of the period. Boys clubs became popular during the Progressive era. The need for after-school programs was associated with the waves of immigration that characterized cities like Syracuse after the Civil War. And reformers were first concerned about children working in factories, but as child labor laws were passed, children gained more freedom but less supervision, and reformers began to focus on structured supervision and recreation. Clubs like these provided health services, technical skills, and safe recreational spaces for youth. The Boys Club of America itself originated with this group of 3 women in Hartford, Connecticut, who formed a short-lived club. The first New York club was formed in 1876 on the Lower East Side. Between 1906 and 1931, the club gradually organized itself into a national organization. And by 1946, there were 260 clubs nationwide. However, despite their concern for the nation's youth, the reformers were also motivated by self-interest based on their own fears of the physical and moral hazards of immigrant neighborhoods. So clubs like these also intended to promote Americanization and assimilation along with their sheltering and protective function. The Syracuse Club was founded in 1892 and had over 600 members by the time the new building was constructed in 1923. So this is a preliminary sketch, but it's similar to what was built. And like most boys clubs, the Syracuse building had a functional design with designated spaces for a pool, library, classrooms, gym, auditorium, and vocational classes. And these are photos of the club's swimming pool and vocational training rooms. And these are the same spaces today. And the pool survives, but there is no question that the interior of this building has been significantly altered during its conversion to law offices, and not many of its functional spaces are recognizable. So I'll tell you honestly that we struggled with this one, which is why I included the consultant's special statement on integrity in the nomination. Some interior spaces are readable, but others are not. But what does stand out throughout the building, even where spatial dimensions have changed, is an overwhelming integrity of materials and finishes, as you can see here with the quarry tiles and brick walls. In almost every space of the building, original finishes were retained and others are being uncovered as the rehabilitation progresses. So after really quite a bit of staff discussion and many drafts actually, we recommended to NPS recommended that it be certified based on the following 4 factors. First, the outstanding exterior design and the relative rarity of the collegiate Gothic style in Syracuse. Second, the inherent symbolism of choosing a high style design associated with education for a boys club building, indicating the founder's seriousness of purpose. 3, the really excellent statement of significance and integrity analysis prepared by the consultant. And 4, the survival of so many historic finishes on the interior. We wrote up our recommendation that way, and the PDIL was approved by the National Park Service, certifying it as an eligible building. The project has proceeded. We now have an approved Part 1. Let's see. We do have a letter of support from the city preservation, the CLG. And I don't know if Kim is on the phone, on the call. Kim, are you there or not? Oh, okay. Well, I invited her. Do you have any questions about the Boys Club?
Questions or comments from the board? So the workshop where they were making the kayaks, was it?
Sorry?
There's this term that I've never seen before, and I believe it's SLOYD, Sloyd.
Oh, that has to do with what do you call it? Like
Woodworking?
workshop for industrial things.
Okay, it's just a term I'm unfamiliar with. It was nice to see.
I'm pretty sure that's what it means.
Okay. Anybody else ever heard of that term? Wint, you've never heard?
Did look it up, not for this one, but for
I deny
earlier
it
nomination.
Okay.
I think it has to do with
There's no such
industrial
word.
teaching. Jonathan, do you know?
No.
What? No one knows?
No one. Has anyone in this room ever heard the term Sloyd?
Could someone look it up on, you've all got your phones out, but I'm pretty sure it has to do with, like industrial education.
We have a definition.
Well, if we trust Wikipedia, it's a system of handcrafted based education started in Finland in 1865.
Interesting connection with the boat building in Finland.
That's the short version.
Cool. Thank you for that transgression. Yeah.
Of all the questions, Doug.
It couldn't help.
Well done,
I'm sorry.
Kat. You
I
stumped
can't-
us.
I can't turn it off.
It was taught in the US until the early 20th century.
Do I hear a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Wayne, and seconded by Jennifer. All in favor?
Aye.
Abstained or opposed? Motion carries.
All right, this is a blurry historic photograph of the Utica Mutual Insurance Company building. Utica Mutual is right next door to the Syracuse Boys Club, and it was designed by the firm of King and King 30 years later. This is a contemporary photo. You can just see the Boys Club there to the left. The nominated building was actually built on a lot that had once served as a playground for the Boys Club. The Utica Mutual Insurance Company building is architecturally significant as a rare and intact example of an international style office building in Syracuse. Completed in 1956, the building was part of a statewide expansion by this insurance company, which had recently constructed its own sprawling modern office complex in Utica. And I tried, but I could not find the architect for this building, but this was 1951. The new Syracuse office was one of King and King's earliest commissions in the international style, and the architects used the commission to demonstrate their proficiency with modern forms and materials. As you know, the international style became the primary expression of European modernism after World War II, when it arrived in America, stripped of its social ideals, and dominated the landscape of corporate America for the next few decades. Utica Mutual was not alone in embracing corporate modernism, characterized by abstracted classical forms, lack of applied ornamentation, and curtain wall construction. The style was ubiquitous among some of the largest and most impressive corporate headquarters in the United States in this period. For King and King, it came to define their practice at mid-century, and they became prolific and skilled interpreters. They designed several prominent buildings in this style in Syracuse and were well known for their dramatic curtain walls and impressive structural work. Construction of this office building was also part of the city's effort to revitalize its urban core. Like many industrial cities, Syracuse saw its growth interrupted by the Depression and World War II. To boost its faltering downtown, city planners focused on courting private economic investment in newer modern buildings. And we saw some examples of this in the Montgomery Street Columbus Circle district expansion that you reviewed last September. These buildings also reflected the transition of the American economy from manufacturing to office-based industries in the same period. And this was definitely a factor for Syracuse, which had once thrived on the industrial economy. By 1965, Syracuse had actually formalized these ideas into a planning document that described the city's intent to attract national and regional headquarters for commerce and administrative offices. Utica Mutual had anticipated this trend 10 years earlier when it constructed its new regional office on Genesee Street. So this is the rear elevation, and then the interior, which was characterized by modern materials that could be easily reconfigured to accommodate multiple tenants. Although the building was constructed for the insurance company at 13,000 square feet, it was also intended to be leased, and among its tenants was King and King itself. The building served both as an advertisement for the progressive vision of the insurance company and as a demonstration of the architectural expertise of King and King, which remained one of the most influential firms in upstate New York. Unfortunately, plans for a revived commercial Syracuse proved wishful thinking, and only 4 years later, Utica Mutual was ready to sell the building, blaming urban renewal and a lack of parking. And you see the little tiny parking area there for its inability to operate the site. Subsequently, the building continued to serve as an office building for various enterprises, well served by its modern exterior, and flexible interior. Again, we have city support for this one, or CLG support for this one, and I guess Kim isn't here. So questions about Utica Mutual?
And this is C only.
C only.
C only.
What's the plan for it if there's no parking?
I believe it's housing, but I'm not sure. I don't really know.
Perfect.
I know we have an approved part twos for both of these, but I didn't look. to see.
Huge building.
Love this
That was
one.
perfect.
Do I hear a motion? There are no more questions. All right, we have a motion from Molly. Do I hear a second? Gretchen, you moved your hand.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? None.
I'd say it was really hard to try to find images for this one. All right, now I have 3 public housing projects. They're all in East Harlem. They were all built in the post-war period, and they're all variations of an important theme. I have letters of support from LPC, and the consultant was Heritage Consulting for all 3 of them. So the first one is Corsi Houses, and if you can see the little square there, this is right in the middle of the East Harlem Historic District, which was listed in 2019, recognizing the history of East Harlem's Jewish, Italian, and Puerto Rican working class immigrant community. Corsi Houses is the only public housing project in the district, which was drawn to exclude blocks of public housing that are just to the south. Those gray areas there are all public housing. And Corsi was assessed as non-contributing to the East Harlem district because it was outside the period of significance. So rather than just try to change the period, we decided to submit an individual nomination recognizing Corsi's own history and significance. So Corsi is the 16-story residential tower in the center, and it's flanked by 2 interconnected 2-story wings, one wrapping around the tower at the bottom of the picture and the other one extending at a 90-degree angle to the left. And those 2 wings constitute a settlement house. There was no extra land for this site, which is kind of landlocked. So note that the recreational spaces were originally developed on top of the settlement house, and you can kind of see them there. And these are a couple, it's really hard to photograph. These are a couple pictures from the ground. And that is the top of the settlement house that once had the recreational spaces, and a couple interiors. That's one of the apartments. And these 2 are in the settlement house. So Corsi Houses is significant as one of a group of mid-20th century high-rise senior housing projects in Harlem developed by NYCHA. These complexes represent the expansion of elderly housing programs under the Federal Housing Act of 1956 and subsequent acts. Now, Chris has presented a few of these before. So as we've learned, NYCHA was a leader in providing housing for senior citizens even before the federal acts. As early as 1938, NYCHA had begun to set aside sections of its complexes for elderly clients. In addition, New York State had also established policies supporting senior housing in the 40s and 50s. In 1951, the New York State Division of Housing mandated that all state-funded housing projects set aside at least 5% of their apartments for seniors. The state also required features in senior apartments that became standard, such as bathrooms with non-slip floors, bathtubs with seats and hand grips, the elimination of thresholds, and electric instead of gas stoves. So in 1956, when the federal government implemented its laws supporting senior housing, it brought increased funding to local housing authorities and initiated a wave of new elderly apartments. So NYCHA built its first exclusively senior housing complex in 1964, the Gaylord Houses, which is just a few blocks away. But Corsi has a second and equally interesting aspect to its significance. Corsi is one of a small set of public housing complexes built in collaboration with a local settlement house, in this case, LaGuardia Memorial Settlement, which has served the neighborhood since 1898. So originally called the Home Garden Settlement, it later became Harlem House and still later LaGuardia. It first served the local Italian community and later expanded to serve East Harlem's more diverse immigrant community. The senior housing project was initiated in 1961 by then Settlement House director and future namesake Edward Corsi, who approached NYCHA himself, proposing that the Housing Authority build a residential tower for seniors and incorporate a new settlement house into its design. Since a big local complaint was NYCHA's top-down approach, the settlement house authorities had first surveyed area residents to gauge interest in the project and found strong support. The settlement also offered its own land as the building site, which guaranteed that the project would be located in the settlement service area itself. But despite its promising start, it took a dozen years for this project to be completed. Initial plans were approved but noted as over budget. And 3 years later, NYCHA hired architect Roger Catan to prepare a new design. Now, Catan, who taught architecture and urban planning at Pratt, was one of the most prominent Black architects in Harlem and a member of the Architects Renewal Committee of Harlem, which we'll learn a little bit more about later. And I couldn't find a rendering of Catan's design, but from the description, it seemed innovative, individualistic, and atypical for a housing project. Nevertheless, the project was repeatedly derailed by struggles over size, financing, and design. And near the end of the process, NYCHA dumped Catan altogether and terminated his contract. He was replaced by Samuel Paul, a more conservative architect, who reused a tower from another housing project to cut costs and simplify the program. Paul's design was borrowed, basic, and less inspiring. Corsi Houses eventually opened in 1973, although it did fulfill the program of combining affordable elderly housing with community support programs in East Harlem. The long struggle to complete it also reveals the tension between well-intentioned programs, community desires, politics, and economic realities. So there is Corsi Houses. We heard from NYCHA after Chris's presentation, and I don't know if anybody from Heritage wants to speak as well.
Yeah, hi, Kath. It's Scott Doyle, and I just want to reaffirm thanks to Kath and Chris and for all their assistance on the Part 1s and the National Register nominations for all of these NYCHA properties, and to Sarah and Olivia and Beth for all their assistance in getting the Part 2 applications in. And this one is pending approval, but the other 3 are currently approved by the Park Service. So thank you for all your assistance and all your help on these. And I love that photograph that you found of the rooftop recreational development. I will need to get a copy of that, please.
I'd thank Kathy Howe for directing me to the Wagner and LaGuardia archives.
That's great. It's much better than my 1980s aerial views that I was able to find.
With the settlement house.
Questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Carol, do I have a second?
Second.
Molly, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstain? There being none, the motion carries.
Okay. The second housing project, this is actually the wrong title. It is the Morris Park Senior Citizens Home. And it's also significant as an example of elderly housing. But the interesting variation here is that it was built using government funds, but sponsored by a religious organization. As noted on the poster, the building was constructed using Section 202 direct loan program of the Community Facilities Administration, a part of the U.S. Housing and Home Finance Agency. This HUD program targeted housing specifically for the elderly at below market rates and allowed faith-based communities to take the lead in developing the projects. The Morris Park Senior Citizens Home is located on East 124th Street, overlooking Marcus Garvey Park. I tried to get Kathy to change the boundary to just get it into the park, but I also do not. It's also directly adjacent to the Mount Morris Park Historic District, which ends at the building right to the left. And I haven't been able to figure out why they didn't include our building and the one to the right because it would have taken the district to the corner, but they didn't. So here we are. This is a concrete block building with brick and tile walls. And from the air, we can see that it's T-shaped. And from the rear, we can see the tail of the T to the right. This is the original plan, which featured small apartments around the exterior and an elevator core and stair in the center. This program encouraged construction of efficiency and one-bedroom units, and that's what we have here. It remains intact. The entrance overhang is actually a later addition, but the lobby and the small apartments generally remain intact. The windows have been replaced several times, but the tripartite design is very similar to the originals. If you can see those little rectangles to the left there, those are air conditioner pockets, and they are original. The building was completed in 1963. It was designed by John Lewis Wilson and Samuel S. Arlen, both important Black architects in New York City. Wilson had actually designed the Harlem River houses in 1931, and in this period, he had an office in Harlem. The building is also significant in illustrating the role of Black churches in providing access to social services and civil rights during the civil rights era. Black churches had a long tradition of providing aid to their congregations, and Black religious organizations were inspired to pursue housing projects in New York City at a time when the city was struggling with so many housing problems. The 1959 federal legislation allowing the Section 202 loan program gave them this opportunity. And among them, the Abyssinian Baptist Church, one of the largest Black churches in New York and a towering influence in Harlem, wholeheartedly embraced this project. The church initially focused first on senior housing in the Mount Morris neighborhood because of its growing poverty and aging population, something Kathy mentioned in her presentation. In order to secure the federal funding, the famed Abyssinian pastors, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. and Oberia D. Dempsey, established the Morris Park Senior Citizens Housing Council, a local nonprofit corporation that functioned as an affiliate of the church to receive funds and lead development. Powell Dempsey and the church were specifically motivated by what they and their community perceived as the shortcomings of the public housing developments produced by NYCHA. The community blamed NYCHA's projects for driving families out, demolishing tenements and row houses, and constructing high-rise towers and super blocks in their place that were often undesirable for poor and minority citizens due to long waiting periods, complicated government processes, and the displacement of the supporting community. The Morris Park Senior Citizens Home aligned with Powell and Dempsey's goals by providing 97 new housing units for senior citizens, most of whom were Black, in their own neighborhood. Because the direct loan program provided for low interest loans through a nonprofit sponsor, the apartments were also affordable to those who earned too much to qualify for public housing. In the program's first year, 28 similar projects were funded and another 24 were under construction. And by 1979, 133 organizations in New York City had formed 84 corporations and built 33,000 apartments across the city. In terms of design, the height of Morris Park appears to be a context-driven choice, considering the building's site and setting within a neighborhood dominated by low to mid-rise buildings. The adjacent building to the east, the Cambridge, another apartment building, was one of the largest buildings in the neighborhood at the time, and the architect seems to have matched the basic form and massing of its neighbor to create visual continuity. The site overlooking the park was also a major bonus because it did not require the designers to provide any landscaping or gardens around the building itself. The building opened in 1963 and it eventually came under the jurisdiction of NYCHA in 1977. I'm not quite sure how that worked. The Morris Park Senior Citizens Home represents another aspect of the effort to provide housing for senior citizens and exemplifies efforts by the Black community to take housing needs into its own hands when they weren't satisfied with NYCHA's response to a critical local need. Its history illustrates the discrepancy between NYCHA's stated goals of providing housing for underserved communities and its failure to understand the needs and wants of the members of those communities. Scott, did you want to add anything, or?
That was a great overview. I appreciate it.
Any questions about Morris Park?
So why isn't this one under criterion, say, for architecture?
We didn't feel that this measured up the way that the other one did. I mean, we just didn't feel that this was special enough, architecturally speaking. We can look at that again.
It's interesting that some are A, some are C,
Yeah.
some are A and C.
I mean, the C one that Chris did, we all felt really strongly that it was a great example of brutalist architecture, and we felt strongly about the plan, the 4-story plan and the interior courtyards, that it really was special. And this one is just an apartment building.
Just a box, which is
Just
what
a
they all
box.
look like.
It's a little nicer than the towers.
I'm trying to figure out
Nicer
how.
than the towers for sure.
Any other questions from the board? Do I hear a motion? Carol,
So moved.
do I have a second? I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Motion carries.
Our last housing project is, this is our last housing project, but don't look for the Jackie Robinson houses in this picture because it isn't there. This is one of the sketches for the East Harlem Triangle Plan, which provides the context for this property. The Jackie Robinson houses is significant for its association with public housing programs in a very small area in the northeast part of Harlem called the Harlem Triangle, which is the 3-sided polygon roughly indicated in yellow on that map. That's the best I could do. And bounded by Park Avenue, 125th Street, and the Harlem River, and populated by Black, Puerto Rican, and white residents. And that's the more specific plan over there. But that's just kind of gives you, it's supposed to give you an idea where it is in the city. Completed in 1973-74, the Robinson houses consist of 2 9-story rectangular sections linked by a 7-story hyphen. The sections are clad in ribbed concrete block and linked on the ground story of the hyphen by an open breezeway. Now, under Robert Moses's influence and his slum commission or whatever it was called, the city had called the Triangle, quote, one of the most blighted and rundown areas in Harlem, wholly unsuitable for housing, a finding that led to the relocation of numerous Black and Puerto Rican residents and a plan to develop an East Harlem Triangle industrial area with more than 4 million square feet of industrial space. This designation did not sit well with the community, and 2 local groups stepped up in protest. The first was the Community Association of the East Harlem Triangle, led by activist and humanitarian Alice Cornegay, which focused on advocating for housing and community welfare within the Triangle. Cornegay denounced not only the city's plans to bulldoze the area, but also its plan for new housing on the edges. She argued that many of the displaced Triangle residents would not meet NYCHA's strict moral requirements for public housing tenants, such as that they not include children born out of wedlock. Cornegay's group forced the city to amend the urban renewal designation, and the industrial plan was never developed. The committee then proposed new plans for the Triangle developed with community input. And the other important group was ARCH, which I mentioned before, the Architects Renewal Committee of Harlem. ARCH was founded in 1964 to provide planning services to low-income communities. By 1968, it was composed entirely of Black architects, including the well-known J. Max Bond and Roger Catan, who was the original architect of Quartzy houses. Arch and Bond in particular took a strong interest in the Triangle's future and felt that the heart of any plan was strong community review and comment. In 1966, the Community Association partnered with Arch to create the East Harlem Triangle Plan, which gave voice to residents' concerns and proposed new redevelopment plans with 3 goals: to provide better living and working conditions in the Triangle, to attract people who had already left to return, and to attract more middle-income residents. The plan included a commercial corridor, new and renovated housing units, green space, and a community services center. Unfortunately, the plan was never developed. However, it did serve as a catalyst for talks with NYCHA to address the estimated need for 2,000 new or rehabilitated housing units in the Triangle. So the Jackie Robinson houses, which are the two rectangles in the center there, emerged from this plan. It was designed by Max Bond and his firm, which tried to respond to the expressed needs of the local citizens. The building also reserved 60% of its apartments for the elderly. And you can see that those rectangles are parallel but not aligned, and that they're not identical in size. And entrance to each of them is from this breezeway. And there's one of the entrances there, and entrance to the, that's inside the entrance. Those are the elevators to the apartments. And then entrance to the apartments in the hyphen itself is from the elevator lobbies on the upper floors. I believe it's that door to the left. This is the plan. And this is an original play area. Despite the efforts and ambition of the Community Association and Arch, the Jackie Robinson houses was the only NYCHA development in the East Harlem Triangle and one of the few East Harlem Triangle Plan initiatives to be realized, although Alice Cornegay was successful in completing a few others not related to NYCHA. Further, despite Arch's and Bond's efforts and enthusiasm, the project was not built exactly the way the architect had conceived it. Nevertheless, the building represents an interesting and important aspect of the history of public housing in Harlem. Jackie Robinson Houses is an example of a public housing development in a neighborhood where residents and community organizations stood up to the city and insisted on directing renewal themselves, and a building that was designed by members of the community who attempted to meet the community's expressed needs. Any questions about the East Harlem Triangle or the Jackie Robinson
That's the same
houses?
question. Why isn't this one under architecture, under C?
We didn't think there was anything architecturally outstanding about
There's
it.
so many of these that we have approved, not today, by white architects that have been just boxes. And then we have a black architect. There's so few pieces of architecture throughout the country that are approved by black architects. And then it's only historically significant, but it's not architecturally significant. I don't see the difference, really. I thought that play area looked fabulous.
Well, I can talk to NBS about it again, see if they would. I mean, it's not really supported by the context. We don't have a section. The only things that were really supported for architecture really were some of the early ones and some of the outstanding brutalist ones that were designed by master architects. The rest.
So master architect is the criteria?
Yes. Work of a master is one of the criteria under C.
So wait, I have a follow-up to that because the nomination says that Bond became one of the most prominent Black architects in the United States. And at the time of his death, he was considered the most influential African-American. So wouldn't that support that architecture should be one?
Well, it also says, and I don't have the original design, that it wasn't built the way he designed it. I can certainly have Heritage look into that, find out what the original design, but I don't have the nomination in front of me, but it cited some of the things he designed that were quite a bit more prominent in.
So it's part of the historic context. Is there any room for the fact that the architect was Black as a contributing set of information for criterion A? Does that make sense?
Again, Doug, is there room in the context statement for that? Well, that's
Does
one
the
thing that
fact-
I think is underdeveloped in the context. Can you go to the mic?
You guys,
sorry, I'm away from it. That's one thing that's underdeveloped in the context, I think, the evaluation of exactly what could be architecturally significant and what isn't.
Okay, Carol?
I have a couple of comments on two different fronts. One, I worked with Max Bond extensively in my capacity as the executive director of the AIA New York chapter. And having watched his practice and seeing him for many years, that he was, I would submit, a master architect, however one would wish to define that. But quite apart from that, I wanted to encourage the staff to work with Heritage Consulting, because it says in this thing that the design was not built according to the initial conception. It says that on page 9 and goes on 2 sentences later to say the same thing. And then on page 16 says it a third time. And I was dying to know why it wasn't built in that manner. And in addition, clearly, we only probably need to mention that once, perhaps twice, but not thrice in the nomination.
It does need some editing. Chris and I work extensively with Heritage.
I
And
know
we
you do.
often have to rewrite and add to their nominations, but we've been, trying our best to.
I fully appreciate that, Kath. I find their nominations.
You're right, absolutely needs some editing.
I find their nominations not up to some of the other standards of similar nominations we've seen. So I can appreciate that that is a task, but we need, before they come to us in draft form, to be hopeful that they could be tighter than this one was.
I also apologize. I bit off a little bit more than I could chew this time with 6, and I found myself really behind when I was trying to get them ready. So we've got a new relationship with Heritage. We've a woman who used to be the NR coordinator for Kansas works for them now, and she's going to be the coordinator for nominations and read them all before we get them. And Chris and I are really hopeful about that because she's really good. So I do apologize for that.
Is this a tax credit project?
It is a tax credit project. I do have letter support from NYS.
Any other questions or comments?
And I will get some more on Max Bond. I know he was a very prominent architect. I just didn't get all his other works in there. I wouldn't call this one of his major works, especially if they changed it. So I'll find out what the original design was.
Thank you.
Would it hurt the project if we tabled it or postponed it until the next meeting?
What was that?
Would it hurt the project if we tabled this nomination form for today?
Scott?
It would have ramifications on the closing, which is scheduled for later this summer. So yes, that would.
Have more coming up in June. So if you don't mind, I don't even mind sending it back to you after it's revised, but prefer that it's up to you, of course.
It's up to us, and it has to pass the board. The tax credit issue should not be an influence on whether or not we vote on a specific nomination.
Well, the thing is that NYS has a very aggressive schedule of sending projects to us, and we can barely keep up with it. So it's up, of course, up.
If it needs more
entirely
work,
up
it
to
needs
you.
more work. So I will ask for a motion.
Can we amend it here and add?
I don't think we can amend something which is lacking, the information.
There is a lot of information in there about Bond's role with Arch, and that establishes his role in community design and development and architectural design. So I'm not sure, and that is part of the criteria A, and we could put, properties nominations only require one criterion for approval. We can put additional notations in there that further research is warranted into the architectural design and the impact and significance of Bond's firm with the property. That's something that has been done in the past to recognize it and make it available for further research.
Okay, so as chair,
I had a quick question.
Please, go ahead, Wayne.
Has there been a part 1 submitted and approved?
Yes, there has been.
And I believe the part 2 was approved as well. We just talked about that yesterday. Right, Chris? Do you remember that one? I remember Olivia talking about it, that the part 2 was approved.
Correct. The part 2 does have approval.
I'm sorry, Scott, I can't hear you. I think we talked about it yesterday. Either there was a request for an amendment or something, but they've been working on the part 2. I think she said she just sent it in yesterday on our call with NYS.
The part 2 has been approved by the National Park Service.
So the reasons, what you would want more is more on Max Bond. You would like me to discuss whether or not it should be architecturally significant, and you would like the nomination edited for clarity. Is that correct?
That's
Yes,
correct.
that's correct.
Is that correct?
That's
correct. Yes.
You know, I'm going to do that anyway. I always edit these after the review board meeting. There's stages, good enough for the LPC, good enough for the board, good enough that I feel comfortable.
It needs more
sending them in.
research, I think. I think it needs more research to
But it's up
determine
to-
what the original plan for the building was, what building, research on what the original plan for the building was, what ended up being what they built, and more research on Max Bond and why he was
Certainly do
important.
that. I will do that anyway.
And see whether or
To
not
me,
it,
the very interesting thing was the whole connection to the two community groups and how they stopped the bulldozing and, you know, got a project that they wanted built. That was, to me, the most interesting part. They stopped NYCHA. But I will definitely get more on Max Bond.
A and C, I think.
I couldn't find on the last one, I could not find the original design for Max Catan or Roger Catan either, and I tried.
He was a far less significant architect than Max
was.
Bond, surely.
He was.
I make a motion that we table it.
So what would you like?
We have a motion to
Motion
table
to-
this nomination form.
Okay.
Do I have a second?
I will second it.
All in favor of tabling this nomination form?
Aye.
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 Any opposed or abstained? It's tabled.
For all of the reasons that Gretchen previously stated before she made the motion.
Correct.
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 Okay.
It's in the record.
I'll just add that the only piece of architecture by Bond that I'm familiar with is late in his career, an addition to the Harvard Club of New York City on West 44th Street, a really first-class piece of work because it was, it adjoined and served a major building by Kim Mead and White. I think it was
I'll say
McKim.
one thing about
So it
interpreting
was
work
just,
of a
it was
master-
neat that
Oh,
he,
sorry, I thought you were done, Winter.
it was just neat that he was able to meld those two together right on the street and looks okay. And works inside very well.
Say one thing about work of a master. If a master architect is designed, every work that architect does is not work of a master. Like they'll even say every work by Frank Lloyd Wright is not work of a master. They have to prove it that this is a masterful work of his or her career. So that doesn't, just because we may want to say that he's a master architect, we may not conclude that this is, we might be able to say it's eligible under C, but if it's so far different from what he designed, I don't know.
Are you saying then that these other projects, that we've approved by master architects are master works of their careers?
No, but you were talking about him as a master. No, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
I'm getting maybe in over my head here because I still have another project. I'll be happy to get as much information I can. I'll send it to you in advance to make sure that I've satisfied what you're asking for.
Thank you.
On to the next one.
Okay, I have one more. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, last but certainly not least, this is the St. George's Lodge number 6, Masonic Temple and Club, located on the corner of State Street and Erie Boulevard in downtown Schenectady. This building is significant in social history for its long association with the Masonic community in Schenectady, and specifically for its association with St. George's Lodge number 6, the largest and most important Masonic order in the city. Lodge number 6 originated in the 18th century and met in this building for most of the 20th century. The Temple and Masonic Club also hosted the regular meetings of more than a dozen other Masonic organizations, making the building a regional hub for the full range of Masonic orders and traditions in the region. The building is also significant in architecture as an excellent example of a sophisticated, high-style designed Masonic temple and lodge building type. As renovated in 1919, the building was transformed into a purpose-built Masonic lodge of dramatic proportions and detail. The building retains excellent integrity and representative features that link it strongly to the tradition and history of Freemasonry. Additionally, the design of the double-height lodge room at the top epitomizes the imagery and iconography of the Masonic Lodge tradition. The period of significance begins in 1919 when the initial renovation and conversion to a Masonic Lodge occurred, and ends in 1974 when the Masons left the building for another home, I believe in Scotia, representing the continuous operation as a Masonic Lodge and club for more than half a century. So the building was constructed in 1911 for the A. Brown and Son Furniture Company, which was itself a successful business founded in 1929. However, Brown's luck soon ran out because only 7 years later it ran out of business and sold the building to the Masons. And you can see the large storefront windows here, and also note on the first floor to the far right that you're going to see a change there when the Masons take over. When the Masons acquired the building, they saw this as an advantage because they continued to rent the first floor to retail establishments for a source of income. So in this contemporary image, you see that there are changes to the front entrance. Those are among the only exterior alterations. Many of the other windows are merely boarded up. And these are the side and rear elevations. And when they purchased the building in 1919, the Masons hired architect William Neal Smith to undertake the renovations. And the only significant, we're going to get a close-up, but if you see the entrance there on the first story far right, the only significant exterior change was the creation of a new side entrance and lobby specifically for access to the Masonic rooms. So above the first floor, every interior surface was completely transformed to include all the spaces and decoration typical of Masonic halls and gathering spaces. I'm just going to show you a few of them. This is the room they met in before their upper lodge room was completed. This is the kitchen. And these are just a few of the many, many cupboards and cabinets throughout the house. The initial renovation, which included creation and decoration of all the lodge rooms except the 5th floor, was completed in 1919 and cost with furnishings $100,000. Okay, so this is the largest and most significant addition, raising the roof approximately 5 feet to create this double height lodge room at the top of the building. This wasn't completed until 1931, having been delayed by funding issues. This is a really spectacular space. And I've paired up a couple of historic images with contemporary ones so that you can see the outstanding level of integrity. St. George's was the largest and oldest continuously operating Masonic organization in the city of Schenectady, with a membership that regularly included the city's leading citizens, a majority of the city's mayors from its first charter until the late 20th century. The building survives with a remarkable degree of integrity. This is also a tax credit project. I have letters of support from the CLG, and I want to introduce Susan Savage, who is from the county's multiplex program, I believe. Susan, do you want to say something? Susan called and asked to speak. Susan? No? Okay. Marcus Pollard, are you on the phone? Marcus is a consultant from Virginia who prepared this nomination, did a great job. Marcus, are you there?
I am here and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Marcus, do you want to say anything?
It was really a great project to work on. It's my first nomination in New York. I've done a lot of work down in Virginia, and it's been a great process. And I want to thank you all for doing the nomination.
Okay, we do have support from the Metroplex people. They've sent me a thank you note yesterday, but I don't know what happened to Susan. She called and asked to speak, but I assume she was speaking positively. So that is the Schenectady Masonic Temple. Marcus, what's the use for the building?
I think it's likely going to be a residential conversion.
Questions from the board?
Questions for the board?
Do we know when the sprinkler system was added?
Marcus?
I don't have a date on that.
Or was it original?
Any chance it's original?
No, I think that was done during the Masonic era. There was one photo I found of the old furniture store, and I don't think there were sprinklers.
Thank you. Any other questions or a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Heather, do I have a second?
Second.
Gretchen, was that?
Mhm.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Thank you
opposed or
very much, and thank you to whoever found my earring, which I see up here, which I thought I lost. So I got something out of it.
Not to Long Island.
So this is the Lynbrook Public Library, located in the village of Lynbrook in Nassau County, not Monroe County. I apologize. There was a typo on the form. I typically work with Western New York, so this is a little out of my realm. So I apologize for that. And it is eligible for listing on the state and national registers of historic places under criterion C in architecture, with a period of significance from its date of construction in 1929 to 1965. At which point interior refurbishments following a 1950s fire were completed. It is a notable local example of Beaux-Arts architecture within the Lynbrook community. It is located centrally, as you can see by that red dot, in Lynbrook's downtown, with easy access to both commercial and residential areas. This siting was intentional, as historically, the library was accessible via foot, as well as by the Long Island Railroad's Babylon and Long Beach lines. The library was designed by regionally significant architect Henry B. Hertz. Hertz studied at the École des Beaux-Arts, where he met his future partner, Hugh Tallant. Together, Hertz and Tallant made a prominent name for themselves as an architecture firm, designing theaters in both New York City and Philadelphia. Notable designs include the New Amsterdam and Lyceum theaters. Together, they designed the Aguilar branch of the New York Public Library, seen on the left here, in 1899 and updated it in 1903. This library was funded in part by donations from Andrew Carnegie, making it an example of a Carnegie library. By 1929, when Hertz designed the Lynbrook Public Library, seen here on the right, the public library movement was well underway. This nationwide movement began in the 19th century and emphasized the creation of free and publicly accessible libraries, including the establishment of Carnegie-funded Carnegie libraries. Much like in other communities across the nation, the drive to create the first Lynbrook Library was spearheaded by female activists, many of whom were also active within the suffrage movement. The village raised funds and took out bonds to build their imposing Beaux-Arts design. The design is characterized by a prominent, pedimented, centrally located entrance, flanked by two stepped-back wings. The pediment over the entry features a carved bust of Pallas Athena, who was the Greek goddess of both wisdom and warfare, which feels appropriate. The wings, as you can see, are dominated by large arched windows, and the north and south elevations feature Palladian windows. The exterior of the library has remained largely unchanged since its construction, with the exception of a large rear addition in 1992. Importantly, the addition incorporated the original exterior wall of the library, leading to only minor modification to the original building's rear elevation. The elevation can be seen here, and the original 1929 library is that brick section on the right. The addition was intentionally designed to be hidden behind that original library's facade. So when you are standing in front of the library, you can't see any of it. You have to go around the corner. It was designed by architects Bentel and Bentel to reflect the brightness and openness of the 1929 Hertz-designed library. The interior of the library was defined by a large open reading room, seen here on the left in the 1950s and on the right in the 1980s. The library stacks have been relocated to the non-historic addition, and the former reading room is currently used for concerts, programs, and other special events, as seen here. You can also see one of the Palladian windows on the left and the original reading room on the right, set up for a program. The interior of the 1992 edition, seen here, mimics the original Hertz design in that it features numerous windows to let in natural light. It has one large reading room and a central reference desk to serve patrons. This nomination was prepared by Kathleen Curran, reference librarian at the Lynbrook Public Library, with support from the Office of the Village Historian and Village Administrator. We received one letter of support for this nomination. I know that there are folks listening in from the library. They were so enthusiastic that the nomination was coming to the SRB that they even talked about making the drive up from Lynbrook. But I believe everybody is just tuning in. So if there's a representative from the Lynbrook Library who would like to comment, please unmute yourself.
Please.
She's just unmuting herself. Oh, are you there?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. My name is John Giordano. I'm the village clerk in Lynbrook. And we just want to give you a brief hello and thank you for all the assistance that you've given us over the past few years. I personally have been in the village since 1980, and my mom was a librarian there. And in addition to the historic significance between the women's movement and U Talent, the architect who designed a lot of historic buildings in Manhattan, we ask that you give this consideration, and we appreciate your support.
Thank you.
We have one more commenter. Kathleen, if you're interested in commenting, you know, but you may, but I know that you're at the reference desk right now. Oh, we can't hear you, Kathleen. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion? Jennifer got it. Wint second. All in favor?
Aye.
Abstain or opposed? Motion carries.
Who was second? Oh,
Wint.
was second. Thank you. It was back through all the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm bringing us home today.
All right.
My,
Thank you.
of course, my first of two nominations. The first one is the Smith Octagon House, located in the town of Stockport in Columbia County. The residence is eligible for listing on the state and national registers of historic places under criterion C for architecture as an early and intact example of the Octagon House style. The nomination's period of significance is circa 1860, reflecting the home's approximate date of construction. The Smith Octagon House is located in the hamlet of Columbiaville within the larger town of Stockport on the east side of US Route 9 on a nearly 2-acre parcel. Ornamental and fruit trees dot the landscape, evoking the property's former life as a fruit farm. The home was presumably built by the property's first owners, the Smith family, circa 1860, using inspiration from the book written by phrenologist and social reformer Orson S. Fowler, entitled A Home for All, or A New, Cheap, Convenient, and Superior Mode of Building. The book espoused Fowler's belief in affordable housing, using a scientific approach to materials and construction methods, and embracing the sanctity of nature in everyday life. The manual provided a comprehensive guide to the construction of octagon houses over traditional building methods and typologies. Specifically, Fowler believed in the benefits of increased natural light coming through windows on multiple walls, the elimination of dark corners, improved ventilation with fresh air circulating throughout the house to a rooftop vent, thick exterior walls for insulation, and a floor plan with shorter distances between rooms. The Smith Octagon House reflects many of these building construction methods and designs as described in his book. The two-story home has 8 sides of equal width and a low 8-sided hipped roof surmounted by an octagonal cupola. The exterior was later clad in wood clapboards in the 1920s. Constructed of grout masonry walls, the home reflects many of the designs discussed in Orson's book, including natural light and ventilation from a symmetrical fenestration and cupola, an overall plan that aimed to reduce room corners and enhance circulation patterns, and a lack of excess interior or exterior decorative embellishments. Interior rooms are organized around 2 central rectangular spaces. Those around them are irregular in dimension. The interior spaces are fully intact and reflect the unique shape of an octagon house. Modest finishes and simple decoration emphasize the importance of economy and connection to nature, both of which are values espoused by Fowler in his book. After falling into a state of disrepair, the Smith Octagon House was fully restored to its original 19th century condition in 2002 and has since been maintained by its current owners. As such, the house retains significance in style, materials, and overall historic integrity. This nomination was prepared by Marissa Maravelli and Neil Larson. Any questions?
You know, the photography in this nomination is so good and comprehensive of the interior, but it made me wanting to see like what it looked like at its low point.
Yeah.
You know, I would like to have seen some before and after photography, just as an editorial comment, not, you know, it doesn't affect the quality of the nomination, but I was just curious about that. Any other comments, questions?
I appreciated the discussion of spiritualism and the families that lived in it to kind of add that texture to the story. And I can make the nomination if we're
We
ready.
have a motion, second by Wayne. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Motion carries.
Reference was made earlier to a 17-sided or 13-sided barn in
Yeah.
Jefferson. Was there ever a 13-sided house? And why stop at 8?
Yeah.
Well, if we find one, you'll see it. All right, our last one for today. Located in the city of Kingston and Ulster County, the Charles D. and Elizabeth Lantry House is eligible for listing on the state and national registers of historic places under Criterion C for architecture as an excellent example of a Queen Anne style residence with a highly intact interior. The property's period of significance is circa 1894, reflecting its approximate date of construction. The Lantry House is located at 111 Down Street on the northwest corner of Down Street and Smith Avenue. Less than a half-mile away is Broadway, Kingston's main commercial strip that lies within the National Register listed Kingston Stockade Historic District. The home is situated in the Midtown neighborhood, which accounts for more than a fourth of Kingston's population and is one of the city's most, quote, racially, ethnically, and linguistically diverse neighborhoods, unquote. Despite experiencing a prolonged period of abandonment, the residence is a clear example of Queen Anne-style architecture. The rectangular 2 1/2 story wood frame building has asymmetrical gables, projecting bays, varied wall cladding, and decorative woodwork characteristic of the style. The interior retains significant historical integrity as reflected in the original floor plan, original main wood staircase with carved floral newel post, historic windows, and decorative woodwork. Much of the home's historic hardware remains intact, including doorknobs, ceiling medallions, window handles, and a built-in storage cabinet within the butler's pantry. While the Lantry House is a fairly modest example of Queen Anne-style architecture compared to other high-style residences, it is one of the most elaborate examples in the surrounding neighborhood, and the only one oriented on a corner lot with both the east and southeast elevations powerfully positioned to convey a sense of grandeur. Unlike many of the neighboring Queen Anne-style properties, which have since been converted into duplexes or multifamily living spaces, the Lantry House retains its original floor plan as a single-family dwelling. The Lantry House is thus an excellent example of Queen Anne-style residence. This nomination was prepared by Tabitha O'Connell, Olivia Holland, and homeowner Eliza Edge. We have received letters of support from Kingston Mayor Stephen T. Noble and Mark Grunblatt, Chairman of the Historic Landmarks Preservation Commission of Kingston. I don't know if Eliza is online. Is she? Okay. Any comments?
Questions or comments from the board about the Lantry House or a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Heather, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed or abstained? Motion carries. Okay, that's the last form. Listen, before we do anything else, I just want to mention an oversight on my part. Wayne Goodman was recused from 2 nominations. I mentioned it prior to our vote on the Colgate Rochester Divinity School, but I neglected to mention it in the context of the Cattaraugus County Memorial and Historic Building, and I just wanted to get that on the record. I apologize for missing that. That concludes our business here for today. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Wait.
Are we getting Deputy Commissioner's report?
Oh, forgive me. I just really want to get in the
What
car.
is happening in Washington?
No, I knew Daniel wasn't here, but I
That's going to take
apologize.
a lot longer than.
Dan's gonna do it.
So, Daniel McKay sends his regards. As you know, Parks is co-chairing with State Ed the 250th Commemoration Commission. Commissioner Pro Tems Randy Simons is that co-chair. They are right now down at Phillips Manor Hall The next meeting for that will be June 7th, and that'll be in Flushing. So he does send his regards, and he sent me some comments he wishes to express. I will say, I see a lot of thank yous in here. So I definitely want to start by saying thank you to Heather Mabey, who is Brian Irwin's proxy. This is great that you're here. I know you are an enormous history fan, a huge booster of all things in Saratoga County as well, particularly the 250th. So thank you very much. To Gretchen, our chair, Molly, Carol, thank you very much for diving in and looking at the NYSHA context. That means a lot to us. That is big work for streamlining very complicated projects. It's going to be an academic discussion for sure. But as you see, they're pretty impactful projects, but important history. So thank you very much there. To Molly, to Tom, and to Wayne, thank you very much for weighing in on the awards. Kathy will give you a bit of an update on, she'll give you an update on the actual conference coming up in May. I'm going to flag, this is budget season in Albany. So as part of the governor's budget, there is a very critical piece of addition to the tax credit program related to affordable housing. This is two components. One of them would make any tax credit project, regardless of the census tract, which tax credits are limited to eligible census tract, all would be eligible if for the purpose of creating affordable housing. So we're looking at new catchment areas that don't see any activity, and those are based on higher earner census tract areas, Long Island, Westchester County. These are some of the areas that need affordable housing the most. So that is actually in the governor's proposal. There is a technical amendment in there too, which is about financing. If anyone's familiar, it's something called transferability. This allows people to basically have separate investors in the state and the federal credit. Since working with this program since 2008, transferability has been a big discussion, a big wish list. Particularly the Preservation League has been advocating for this with housing advocates. That's big news for this program. So we will see what happens, hopefully with an on-time budget in April. Also tracking two bills, one a separate bill, Fahey and Warner, who are, Fahey is now in the Senate, and Warner, who has been a lead in the Assembly on many tax credit issues, have some really common sense approvals to the homeowner tax credit, and some things that would prevent it from being diminished. Particularly, the program currently allows for people making under $60,000 to take it as a refund. That will go away in 2025 without the passage of that, as well as a diminishment of the total amount of the credit to lower it beneath $50,000 per year. So we're watching that very closely. I think the big news is that last week, Deputy Commissioner McKay and I spent in DC for the National Advocacy Week. This is hosted by Preservation Action, the National Council of SHPOs, with heavy involvement from the National Trust. All states and territories, that can participate in this event, which was probably in my 10 years of doing it, the most extraordinary year I've ever seen on the Hill. I want to point out in the back, if Megan Eves could raise her hand, new staff member who walked into the office when was asked to coordinate and schedule as many congressional meetings and Senate meetings as they possibly could. We met with 17 of the 26 congressional offices and both Senate offices. That is an extraordinary amount of meetings to get. So Megan walked into Cordell's group, and big compliments to that entire team who prepares us with individual district information down to the granular numbers of dollars spent and invested, the amount of federal grants that run through their districts, really tailor-made, just curated discussions about historic preservation. These meetings, were unusual. Everybody had something sort of different to say, different perspectives. People are part of different committees out there. We meet with people from natural resources, appropriations. Basically, the big thing that our job is to do is to push for our portion of the Historic Preservation Fund. And that is a good amount of funding, about 1.7 comes to New York State. The fund also includes various grant programs. They have included in the request certain, I guess we call them DEI grants, underrepresented, civil rights. These things are still in their proposal. I don't know what's going to happen, to be quite honest. We're talking about resolving something and trying to get a continuing resolution before government potentially shuts down on Friday. They're resolving a past appropriation and a future appropriation. But many compliments to the team. We were joined with Caitlin Mize from Preservation League, Andrea Goldwyn from New York Landmarks Conservancy. It is very, very interesting times, for sure. Basically, when I looked at sort of the report of giving it out here, I think the biggest thank you, I have to make to this is to our federal counterparts in the National Park Service. Their report was guarded. They are looking at reduction plans. We have seen already the reduction in federal highway cultural resource staff, GSA. DOGE hasn't, made its way to the Park Service, but they will within a week or two. The extraordinary work that this board does, this staff does, all ends up in the hands of capable federal employees who make these projects happen. So to conclude that report, thank you to everybody at the Park Service and the other federal agencies doing cultural resource work.
Dan, what do you feel you can say when you're meeting with the offices of the members of Congress and the Senate about preserving that National Park Service function that's so important to us? I mean, is this something that sort of will be scary for the Park Service folks, or do you feel that you really are obliged to speak up for them?
Speak up for them, absolutely, and speak up for our own staff. It's important. It is very typical to, go to Washington and use superlatives about New York State. Number one in listings, number one in tax credits, number one in 106 reviews. We're getting the grants, we're doing this. It wasn't a time for superlatives at all. It was a time to listen, to ask how we could help. The very fact is a diminishment in the federal workforce is going to put enormous challenges on New York State employees to get the work done. It's a reminder that our office is very generously overmatched, like way overmatched. New York State values the regulatory role of preservation, recognizes the work that we do. Every federal law seems to have a state counter law. So you put them together, we have strong justification for also keeping us well-funded. But to let, elected officials know that when there is not somebody there, we're looking at these registered nominations could go down there and just automatically get listed after 45 days. Tax credits could either build up or could get rubber stamped. Certainly grants are going away. We did experience our grants portal shutting down. We expedited every payment we could make out of that. But like everybody here, every day seems a little bit different. So it is a challenge, but it is very important to let our elected officials know how we can help. And it turns out they want information.
Wow.
Sorry to be grim.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Albany. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Just very quickly, some new business here. Thank you, Wayne, for bringing the flyers here. You all have the flyer. The upcoming statewide preservation conference, combined with our New York State Historic Preservation Award ceremony, is going to be held in Poughkeepsie this year. The event is May 6th through May 8th at the Doubletree in Hilton, Poughkeepsie. Please sign up. We'd love to have representatives from the State Review Board there. Especially if you can't attend the conference, come for the evening awards, the Preservation Awards, which will be on May 7th. Cordell's team is hard at work on the Preservation Awards. And again, thank you for the three of the committee members here, board members who helped select. We had a nice roster. We have a very exciting roster of awards. So love to see you at the conference. And it is organized by the Landmark Society, our agency, Greater Hudson Heritage Network this year. They're getting in on the action. It's great working with them. So we'll have some museum people. It's a little bit different, along with our preservation people, the City of Poughkeepsie, the Preservation League, and of course, the Landmark Society. Next State Review Board meeting, I think I might have good news. Hold on. Hold on.
News for
What is
who?
going to be here? Hold on. Wednesday, June 11th. It is scheduled for here because the technology works for us here. However, Jen Lamack, thank you for the insider information. We are hoping, we did not know about this, that we can pay in advance for a block of parking spots in the underneath
Parking garage.
the parking garage.
Just below the museum.
Okay. So we're going to look into this right away, just to let you know. So that's a good news. It's all good news. And that's all we have. Anybody else have any new business?
Nope.
So motion.
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
We're still waiting for
So
a
moved.
new commissioner for the agency.
We are, yep.
Is Randy on the list?
I can't comment on that. He is our acting commissioner and doing
I'm
a
a
great job.
volunteer. I don't work. I am not an official employee,
So
but
can
I
you
can
say
say,
stuff?
I can say yes.
Good.
11.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Was that June 11th?
I'll raise it back to Buffalo.
No. Is bracing for the threat is huge.